Chapter 517. Although his voice was strange and hoarse, he didn't sound old. Quite the contrary, he sounded young. Since he could recognize me, he must have met me before. However, I frowned and thought about it. I thought about the young masters I had met several times, but I couldn't remember anyone who had reached the yang spirit realm at such a young age. Who are you? Do you know me? After Officer Wong told me about Fu's cultivation base, I wasn't afraid of this masked man. After listening to my question, the masked man kept silent for a while. Then he laughed. His voice was like a night owl's chirping, which made people shiver. Yeah, with my current appearance, not only can you not recognize me, but I also can't recognize myself when I look in the mirror. While talking, he put his hand on his face and tore off the mask. His face was black, but it wasn't light black, nor was it the glossy black of a black man. It was the kind of black skin that had been burned and carbonized. There were many cracks on his black skin, and new pink granulation could be seen in those cracks. There was also yellow pus around the granulation. When people described others as ugly, they would say that they wanted to vomit at first glance. Generally speaking, it was an exaggeration. However, the masked man's face wasn't exaggerated at all. It was a face that made people want to vomit. I frowned and held back my urge to vomit, waiting for him to continue. Anyway, it doesn't matter if I can't recognize myself. If I hadn't become like this, I wouldn't have the power I have now. While talking, the masked man stretched out his hand. His palm was facing up, and his fingers were slightly bent. A black light shone from his palm, and a seal appeared vaguely in the thick black mist. I was shocked when I saw the Celestial Master Seal. The Celestial Master Seal was the symbol of a Celestial Master. It proved that the masked man had a Celestial Master's cultivation base. However, he had captured two young god Celestial Masters, Ah Shou and Ah Kai, and wounded Ah Lu. He had injured three young god Celestial Masters in a row, while I was just an ordinary Celestial Master. How? How could it be? Not only me, but Officer Wong, who had a disdainful face, also became serious. He looked at the masked man with his bright eyes. With the cultivation of an ordinary heavenly master, there were many possibilities for him to be able to severely injure three young god heavenly master in a row. However, no matter what method he used, it meant one thing, and that was that the masked man had extremely strong potential. There was no end to the path of cultivation. No matter how high one's cultivation was, it could never compare to one's limitless potential. Furthermore, the masked man was able to heavily injure the three young god heavenly masters. In terms of cultivation alone, he could be said to be terrifying. Everyone was shocked speechless, but the masked man did not seem to feel anything. He played with his Celestial Master Seal in his hand. Although the two eye sockets on his charred face were deformed, his eyes were still healthy. There was an intoxicated look in his eyes as he murmured again, "With this seal, it won't be a loss no matter what you turn into. What's your cultivation now? Why can't I see through it? That's right, that person took that thing. He should have given it to you, right? With that thing, you at least be a Celestial Master, right? What about your seal? Is it more powerful than mine?" As he spoke, his tone suddenly became violent, and the hatred in his eyes became more intense. He roared hoarsely, "It's you again. It's always you. I saw that thing first. It belongs to me. I will kill you and take that thing back." I was confused. That thing? That person? What's going on? This time, before I could ask, Wong Can, who was standing next to me, suddenly said coldly, "Humph. Zhou Yi is a member of the Nine Cauldrons family. You want to kill him? You have to ask the Wong family for permission." During the conversation, the masked man had been staring at me. When he heard Wong Can's words, he didn't even turn his head. He just waved his hand in disgust and scolded, "Noisy." As he moved, the Celestial Master Seal in his hand suddenly emitted a monstrous black aura. In the thick black aura, for big ink-colored characters loomed. "Great monster of the remote antiquity." After it was revealed, the four big ink-colored characters surged in the wind. With a strange aura, they wrapped around Wong Can's body. Seeing these four characters, everyone was shocked again. Even Wong Can, who was being attacked, didn't do anything but widen his eyes. It was said that everyone had different handwriting on the Celestial Master Seal. According to the number of characters, the complexity of the characters, and the meaning of the characters, the power of the Celestial Master Seal was different. To put it simply, the more characters and the more complex the characters, the stronger the strength and the greater the potential. Not long ago, I saw Liang Tianxin's and Xiao Sigui's Celestial Master Seals. Liang Tianxin Seal had more than half of the character ghost, but it hadn't formed a complete character yet. Xiao Sigui's seal had a complete character corpse on it. But because the character corpse was relatively simple, there was not much difference between the two seals. According to my understanding, the one-word seal was a relatively powerful seal among the Celestial Masters, similar to the one-line Earth Masters. To put it simply, one character on the seal represented the potential of the Yang spirit. But the Masked Man seal had 4 characters. It was different from when the Earth Masters opened their meridians. The number of characters on the seal not only proved the potential, but also represented the strength of the seal. The Celestial Master Seal could directly resist the enemy, so the power of the 4-word seal was much stronger than that of the 1-word seal. In addition to the number of characters, what was more terrifying was the meaning of the 4 characters on the Masked Man's seal. Great monster of the remote antiquity. The characters on the Celestial Master Seal had a strict format. Liang Tianxin's half-character, Ghost, and Xiao Sigui's Corpse both represented the definition of their power. Among the 4 characters on the Masked Man's seal, the character Demon was also the definition of power. It was neither a ghost nor a corpse, and it had nothing to do with Taoist Qi or witchcraft Qi. The character Demon was extremely strange and unique. It reminded me of the Qingqiu clan and the so-called Monster Emperor puppet in a message that Nan Gong had left me. But that was not the scariest part. The scariest part was the first 3 characters. Anyone who had some understanding of ancient Chinese would understand that these 3 characters were extraordinary. The remote antiquity was the Great Marsh, and the ancient was the time. The character Great was extremely noble. In the Celestial Master's seal, other than numbers, the meaning of the words was also very important. With these 4 words on the Celestial Master seal, not to mention the Yang God Celestial Master, the Masked Man in front of him even had a chance of stepping into the Yang God Ascension and Sunset Ascension. Everyone was immersed in shock. Fortunately, Ah Lu and Ah Shi, the 2 Yang God Celestial Masters, were relatively sober. When the 4 ink-colored characters almost wrapped around Wang Can, the 2 of them took action at the same time. They turned their palms into knives and cut off the 4 characters, which saved Wang Can's life. The Masked Man did not mind that his attack had failed. Instead, he sobered up from his previous state of mind. He turned his palm and took back his Heavenly Master Seal. Ignoring Officer Wang and the others, he said to me, "It seems you really didn't recognize me. Well, I won't play riddles with you. Brother Zhou, do you remember the Liu family in the capital?" Liu family? Hearing those 2 words, my eyebrows furrowed. How could I forget the Liu family? Apart from the so-called Heavenly Tao that captured Lao AI, the Liu family is the only existence that can trigger my violent emotions. But why did he suddenly mention the Liu family? This person is related to the Liu family? Is he the backer of the Liu family? Seeing that I was still a little confused, the Masked Man laughed again. "Brother Zhou, you still don't remember me." Then he put the mask back on his face and stretched his hand to tear the clothes on his chest. Lu Zhenyang, how could it be him? Didn't he enter the blood sacrifice cave in the royal tomb of the Shang dynasty? More importantly, after I hit him hard, his meridians were all broken. His cultivation base was almost gone, and he couldn't cultivate anymore. How could he survive in the blood sacrifice cave? Why did he suddenly have the Celestial Master cultivation base? No wonder he was so angry. No wonder I felt that kind of palpitation earlier. It was actually him. I looked at Lu Zhenyang in a daze. Anger rose in my heart. Chapter 518. While I was feeling uneasy, Wang Can became angry. Perhaps he was afraid of Lu Zhenyang's seal. So he suppressed his anger and asked, Lu family? Are you from the Lu family of Mount Lingshan, one of the 72 blessed lands? Lu Jinyang seemed to notice him. He turned his head and glanced at him. Who are you? How come you know about the Lu family's ancestral court? Their conversation surprised me. Taoism had a saying about the blessed lands. The blessed lands were divided into 10 great heavens and 36 small heavens, while the blessed lands were divided into 72 blessed lands. The Wanwu Grotto heaven that Wang Can mentioned was one of the 10 great heavens. I thought it was just a Taoist saying, but I didn't expect that there were not only people from the 10 great heavens, but also the Lu family in the capital was one of the 72 blessed lands. If all the blessed enclaves had secluded clans, how great of a force would that be? Hearing Lu Jinyang's answer, Wang Can's face relaxed a little. He smiled and said, It turns out that you are a fellow Taoist from Mount Lingshan. I am Wang Can from the Heavenly King of Wangwu Grotto Heaven, the head of the 10 great heavens. We are from the same sect. There must have been a misunderstanding. Let's not talk about this. I want to know how you got here. Do you have such a small cauldron? Then he showed the Yuzhou cauldron in his hand. Lu Jinyang shook his head. Obviously, he didn't take his words to heart. He said disdainfully, What does it have to do with you how I got here? Stand aside and don't be noisy. Then he turned his head and stared at me, as if he wanted to say something. Wang Can was arrogant, so he couldn't stand Lu Jinyang's attitude. His face turned red, and he said coldly, You are too arrogant. It's just a blessed lands. I thought you were one of the 9 cauldrons because you could enter here. Now, it seems that you are not. Don't blame the Wang family for bullying you. Then he turned his head and said indifferently, Fu, kill him. I turned my head and found that a long-haired old man in linen clothes had quietly appeared behind Wang Can. From the way he addressed me, he should be Heavenly Master Fu, who had reached the profound Yang spirit realm. Hearing Wang Can's words, the old man bowed and walked toward Lu Jinyang. Lu Jinyang's expression remained indifferent. He calmly covered his chest with his clothes. He wasn't in a hurry to deal with Celestial Master Ah Fu. Instead, he calmly said to me, Zhou, you wait a moment. I'll kill him first, then I'll deal with you. Then, he didn't wait for my reply. He raised his right hand, and the black seal appeared again. Below the seal were 4 big, ink-black words that swelled in the wind and flew towards Ah Fu. The power of his seal was extremely strong. Obviously, his cultivation was only 1 step away from the Yang God level. Moreover, with the 4 words on the seal, his strength was even stronger than ordinary Yang God, Celestial Master. However, Fu was also extraordinary. He had the cultivation of the great accomplishment of the Yang spirit. Seeing the 4 black characters approaching him, he didn't even use the Yang spirit. He just opened his mouth slightly and spat out a word. Break. The 1-word formula commonly used by the Taoist master was extraordinarily powerful in the mouth of Ah Fu, who had reached the profound Yang spirit realm. As soon as the word was shouted, the 4 ink-colored characters that Lu and Ashi had to deal with before were directly shattered, turned into several scattered auras, and dissipated in the air. At this time, Lu Jinyang's face finally became serious. The seal in his hand moved again, but this time, he threw it directly at Fu. The seal turned into the shape of a small mountain and pressed down on Fu. Fu was still indifferent. He stretched out his finger and gently touched the seal that was falling down on his head. On the top was a huge seal in the shape of a small mountain, and below it was only a slender finger. It seemed that there was a great disparity in strength, but in fact, after the 2 collided, Fu just calmly withdrew his finger, while Lu Jinyang's seal seemed to have suffered a heavy blow. In an instant, it emitted a strong black gas, shrank, and returned to its original shape. It quickly flew back to Lu Jinyang's hand. During this process, Fu didn't stop walking. At this time, he had already walked in front of Lu Jinyang. He stopped, shook his head at Lu Jinyang, and said, The Lu family of Mount Lingshan hasn't made any progress these years. Who is Lu Ziang to you? It seemed that he had taken control of the situation at this time, but Lu Jinyang's eyes narrowed, and he said coldly, How dare you mention my grandfather's name? As soon as he finished speaking, he He stretched out his hand and pressed his chest. From the big hole in his chest, he took out a huge and exaggerated battle axe. When I saw this battle axe, I felt a shock all over my body, and an inexplicable fear filled my whole body. This battle axe gave me the same feeling as when I first touched the Xianyuan sword box. And what was even more incredible was that when I first came here, there was a headless giant carved on the outermost bronze gate, and the battle axe in the giant's hand seemed to be exactly the same as the one in Lu Xinyan's hand. It was said that the weapon of the god of war, Qiyu, was a battle axe. Could it be that the battle axe in Lu Xinyan's hand was Qiu's axe? If this was really Qiu's tomb, then it was normal for Lu Xinyang to come here with the Qiu axe. While my heart was palpitating, the fatty not far from me suddenly groaned in pain. I quickly turned my head and saw that he was covering his eyes and turning around, as if he didn't dare to look at the battle axe again. Not only the two of us, but Fu, who was standing in front of Lu Xinyang, also had an unusually solemn look on his face. He was no longer as carefree as before, and his hands immediately formed a seal. Above his head, a completely solidified Yang spirit jumped out and sat upright. Its small eyes carried a dangerous aura as it stared at Lu Xinyang without blinking. After taking out the battle axe, Lu Xinyang became even more arrogant. He looked at Fu with disdain and said coldly, "I heard my grandfather talk about some heavenly abodes and hidden families, but it's just the 10 heavenly abodes. Is it really that amazing?" After saying that, he held the battle axe with both hands like a boorish man in front of military formation. With a shout, he swung the battle axe at Fu's head. Suddenly, there was a whimper in the air. Lu Xinyang's body was surrounded by a strong wind, blowing away the red blood mist around him. The red battle axe carried an extremely fierce momentum, and in the blink of an eye, it reached the Yang spirit above Fu's head. Fu's body remained motionless, but the Yang spirit, which looked like a baby sitting on top of his head, moved. It did not dodge. Instead, it stretched out its hands and clasped its palms together. With a bang, it caught the battle axe. Lu Xinyang snorted and pulled the battle axe out of the Yang spirit's hand. After spinning half a circle around his body, the battle axe swung toward his head for the second time. This time, Fu took a step back and reached out his hand to gently press on the Yang spirit's head. Then, the Yang spirit jumped down from his head. An illusory Taoist sword suddenly appeared in its hand, and it raised its hand to block the battle axe. After the two collided, there was another loud noise. This time, the Yang spirit's Taoist sword was even more difficult to block. The illusory Taoist sword in its hand shook violently and almost dissipated. At the same time, Lu Xinyang, who was maintaining his attacking posture, didn't feel good either. After only 2 strikes, he seemed to have lost all his strength. His chest heaved up and down violently, and the battle axe in his hand fell to the ground. His body was half paralyzed, leaning against it. It was obvious that the battle axe seemed to be a simple swing, but it consumed a lot of energy. It reminded me of the Xianyuan sword box. At the same time, I was even more certain that the battle axe in Lu Xinyang's hand was most likely the legendary Qiyu axe. Combined with what he had said before, it was very likely that he had seen the Xianyuan sword in the Shang dynasty's mausoleum, and that he had obtained the Qiyu axe. When he said, "That man took that thing," he was referring to Nangong, who had taken the Xianyuan sword. The Qiyu axe was only Qiu's weapon, while the Xianyuan sword was one of the best treasures among the 10 great ancient divine weapons. The two couldn't be compared. Even so, judging from Lu Xinyang's cultivation and the power of the Qiyu axe, he had gained more power than I had. If it weren't for Officer Wang and Fu, I wouldn't have been able to resist Lu Xinyang with my current power. Not to mention keeping the Xianyuan sword, I would have lost my life here. In the current situation, I could only hope that Fu could stop the violent Lu Xinyang. I lifted my head and saw that the situation wasn't bad. Although the Taoist sword in Fu's hand had almost dissipated, it hadn't dissipated yet. It seemed that it still had some fighting power. Lu Xinyang, on the other hand, hadn't moved the Qiyu axe for a long time. It was obvious that he was exhausted. It seemed that we had passed this hurdle safely, but I still didn't feel good. Chapter 519. Afu and Lu Jinyang had both lost their ability to fight, so Wang Can's advantage in numbers was obvious. Wang Can would not let go of this opportunity to kill Lu Jinyang when he was weak. After seeing that Lu Jinyang was exhausted, he immediately winked at a Lu and a Shi. The two understood and didn't rush to deal with Lu Jinyang. Instead, they attacked the two heaven masters behind Lu Jinyang and forced them to retreat with one move. Then they took back the injured Asho and Akai. After rescuing the person, the two of them met up with Afu and pressed towards Lu Jinyang together, surrounding him in a triangular formation. At this time, Afu had rested for a while, and the Taoist sword in the Yang spirit's hand had condensed again. He recited a spell, and the index and middle fingers of his right hand formed a sword. With a gentle wave, the Yang spirit above his head jumped down, and the small Taoist sword in his hand suddenly grew bigger and chopped at Lu Jinyang. When they were fighting before, Afu had been defending, so the power of the Yang spirit couldn't be seen. Now, when he attacked, the small Taoist sword turned into a long rainbow, and its momentum was terrible. At the same time, Alu and Ashi also activated their Yang spirits and followed Afu's Yang spirit Taoist sword, attacking Lu Jinyang together. How terrible the attack of three Yang god celestial masters was! The whole blood maple forest was filled with a pressure, and the blood fog around us was drawn by all kinds of forces and was instantly washed away. Lu Jinyang was still standing there with the Chiyu axe. After the blood fog dissipated, the iron mask on his face glowed with a cold luster, as if he didn't take the three Yang god celestial masters seriously at all. It wasn't until their attacks approached him that he suddenly stood up, opened his mouth, took a deep breath, and swung the Chiyu axe again. Originally, he was gasping for breath and seemed to be exhausted, but when he raised the axe, the power seemed to be stronger than before. He held the axe handle with both hands, and his body arched into a bow shape. His body was not tall, but now he looked like a towering giant. Chiyu swung the axe in the air, and the blade of the axe rubbed against the air. There was no sound of breaking the air, but a dull rumbling sound, which sounded like the roar of a giant or the roar of an ancient god of war. Finally, the huge battle axe came crashing down at exactly the same time as Fu's Yang god Dao sword. For some reason, the two seals of the Taoist master, which had been following the Yang spirit Taoist sword, also caught up at this time. It looked like the unparalleled axe had forcibly gathered all the power together. The four shockingly powerful forces collided with each other, but strangely, there was no earth-shattering sound. Instead, all of the forces seemed to be annihilated. The powerful forces disappeared and were replaced by a cloud of white mist at the point of collision. The white mist was only the size of a balloon. It looked like a person's eye, but with the naked eye, one could see the terrifying power hidden in it. This white mist was like a white balloon, slowly rising, floating higher and higher. When it was in midair, there was a crisp sound of an explosion. The sound of the explosion was very small, but with this sound, a strong wind suddenly raged in the air. In an instant, the seemingly boundless blood maple forest in front of me suddenly became shorter. All the tree trunks shook crazily, and countless clouds of blood mist drifted out from the branches and leaves. The empty space in midair was filled with blood mist again. When the wind rose, even with my cultivation, I had to close my eyes for a moment. After the wind dissipated, I squinted and opened my eyes to look at the two parties fighting. Lu Jinyang didn't seem to move. He was still standing in the same place with the huge axe. The only thing that changed was the mask on his face. The iron mask was still wrapped around his face, but it was covered with dense cracks. After a few seconds, with a sudden sound, the mask cracked inch by inch and turned into pieces of iron slag, scattering on the ground. On the horrifying face under the mask, there were countless cracks on the scorched black skin. Red pus and red blood mixed together and dripped down the neck. It was disgusting and bloody. I looked at Afu and the other two. They were all sitting cross-legged on the ground. Their clothes were neat, and there was no trace of blood on their bodies. However, their faces were pale, and they looked much better than Lu Jinyang. But in fact, I could see that they were more seriously injured. Ah Fu's yang spirit couldn't be seen at this moment. Apparently, it had been absorbed into his body. As for Ah Lu and Ah Shi, their yang spirits were sitting cross-legged on top of their heads. They looked intact, but even Ah Fu's yang spirit was injured and couldn't show up. How could their yang spirits be intact? I took a closer look and found that their yang spirits had countless cracks. At this moment, I was holding them in my hands, and I guessed that they didn't have the strength to absorb them into their bodies. After suffering such a serious injury, if they couldn't recover their yang spirits, their realms would be stagnant for the rest of their lives. I turned to look at Wang Can. His face was extremely gloomy. His eyes were fixed on Lu Jinyang, and his face was full of fear. Obviously, he had thought that by calling Ah Fu back, he could suppress Lu Jinyang. He hadn't expected that Lu Jinyang, who hadn't reached the Yang God realm, would be so strong. At this moment, the 5 Yang God heavenly masters of the Wang family were all seriously injured and had lost their fighting capacity. Only Wang Can was left, but he hadn't reached the heavenly master realm yet. Compared with before, the situation was completely different. On Lu Jinyang's side, except for the 2 heavenly masters who still had their strength, no one dared to ignore Lu Jinyang, who looked extremely miserable. Just now, they had seen him lose his ability to fight. In the end, he had forced back 3 Yang God celestial masters, including Ah Fu. Although he was in an even more sorry state now, no one was sure if he could swing his axe again. Once he swung his axe again, no one here would be able to resist him. At this moment, both sides were seriously injured, but the air was still stagnant. Everyone was looking at each other like tigers watching their prey. No one knew what the other side would do next. Yao Yao seemed to be unable to bear the oppressive atmosphere. She moved a few steps closer to me and timidly hid behind me. I stretched out my hand and lightly patted his arm. Yao Yao was scared, but my heart calmed down a bit. Lu Jinyang was indeed very strong, but I didn't believe that he still had strength left in that situation. Wang Can had used all his strength, and I knew the relationship between the fat father and son and me. So at this moment, I was the strongest. Even if I couldn't contact the snake spirit and Tong Tong, I could deal with everyone with my cultivation and the Xin Yuan sword in my hand. Perhaps Wang Can was alarmed by my and Yao Yao's actions, but he finally made a move. He said coldly, "Fellow Taoist of Lingshan, you have a strong cultivation. If I'm not wrong, the axe in your hand is the legendary Qiyu axe, right? With your heavenly master cultivation, you defeated 3 Yang God heavenly masters with 1 axe. It is indeed an ancient treasure. Since you have the Qiyu axe, you are naturally qualified to enter Chiyou's tomb. You and I are both here for Chiyou's inheritance. Since we can't decide the winner, let's rely on our luck. My Wang family represents the 9 Cauldrons clan and will not stand in your way. Chiyou's inheritance is on the Ward God Mountain in the Blood Maple Forest. Fellow Taoists of Lingshan, please." Then he stepped aside, indicating that he wouldn't stand in my way. When Lu Jinyang heard what he said, his expression didn't change much. He ignored him and turned to look at me. The corners of his mouth twitched a few times. After trying for a while, he suddenly smiled at me. His voice was even hoarser than before. "If that's the case, Zhou Yi, I'll wait for you in front." Then he twisted his neck a few times and his stiff body slowly moved. He waved his hand to call the 2 heavenly masters behind him. Then he walked into the blood maple forest with trembling legs. When his back disappeared in the blood mist, I couldn't help but shiver. I turned to look at Wang Can. This guy looked arrogant and easily angered. He looked like a young master of an aristocratic family, but I didn't expect him to be so ruthless. In that situation, he could still take advantage of the situation to set up a conspiracy. After passing the short mountain and moving forward, the blood spirit guards would appear in the blood maple forest. For every person that entered, there would be a corresponding blood spirit guard. With Fu's strength, he couldn't defeat a blood spirit guard even after fighting for a long time. With Lu Jinyang's current state, he would only be courting death if he encountered a blood spirit guard. Chapter 520. His cultivation base isn't bad. I don't know how lucky he was to get the Chi-Yu axe. Unfortunately, his brain isn't that good. Wonkin wore a disdainful smile as he gazed at the blood mist in front of us. It seemed he could already see Lu Xingyang being killed by the blood spirit guards. Although his appearance was annoying, considering Lu Xingyang's terrifying power and the grudge between us, I was on Wang Can's side. But was Lu Xingyang that easy to deal with? I didn't know why, but I didn't think it would be that easy. Lu Xingyang was like a cockroach that wouldn't die. He had been in desperate situations many times, but he hadn't died. Instead, his power had grown faster than mine. Moreover, he had the Chi-Yu axe, which was an ancient weapon. How could the blood spirit guards kill him easily? Although I was thinking about it, I didn't show it on my face. Anyway, we had to move forward. Whether Lu Xingyang was dead or alive, as he had said, he would be waiting for me in front of us, no matter if he was dead or alive. I didn't say anything, but Wang can suddenly turn around and ask me about Lu Xingyang's situation. He asked me what kind of grudge I had against Lu Xingyang and why he only stared at me. There is a saying that the one who knew you better than your family was your enemy. It was true. The Lu family was the family that I knew the most about metaphysics. As Wang can ask me about it, I calmly told him the situation of the Lu family. As for the grudge between us, it wasn't a secret, so I calmly told him. I see. Wonka nodded. It seemed he didn't care about our grudge. After a while, he frowned and asked, "Even so, he killed your parents and you killed his grandfather. It seems he didn't suffer any losses. Moreover, his cultivation base is much higher than yours. Why does he still care about you? It doesn't make sense." He muttered to himself, and his expression was filled with confusion. I sneered inwardly. As a young master of an aristocratic family, I guess Wang Can was used to being the center of attention. Lu Xingyang only stared at me and didn't care about him. I guess he was upset. Lu Xingyang was our common enemy. He was so strong, so whoever he stared at would be in danger. Wang Can was interesting. He was jealous of me because of this. I couldn't help but grin. I was also a little speechless. Fortunately, after muttering to himself for a while, Officer Wang didn't say anything else. He threw me aside and turned to check on the injuries of his subordinates. Regardless of Lu Xingyang's situation, there would be many dangers in Chiyo's tomb. Fu had to deal with the blood spirit guards in the front. I hurried to follow them to check the situation. Among the few young god celestial masters, Ah Shou and Ah Kai had the lightest injuries. Ah Fu was also fine, but his yang spirit was slightly injured. The self-healing ability of the yang spirit was very strong. After a little nourishment, it could be restored to its original state. Ah Lu and Ah Shi were in the most serious condition. Their yang spirits were almost shattered. The yang spirit was a spiritual object and had the ability to heal itself. However, after being broken to such an extent, it must have lost its ability to heal itself. It could only rely on its own strength to slowly nourish itself. It had been a while since Lu Xingyang had left, but Ah Lu and Ah Shi's yang spirits had just returned to their bodies. They wouldn't be able to use the power of their yang spirits for at least a few days, and it was hard to say whether they could fully recover in the future. After learning about the situation, Officer Wang called Ah Kai and asked him to accompany Ah Lu and Ah Shi to leave this place and return to Wanwu Grotto Heaven. After Ah Kai accepted the order, Officer Wang asked him to go back and call the other metal, wood, water, fire, and earth celestial masters to help them. After listening to their conversation, my heart shivered. Although they didn't mention the cultivation base of the metal, wood, water, fire, and earth celestial masters, Wonkin had specifically told Akai that they were at least 5 celestial masters. Perhaps they were 5 young god celestial masters. If that was the case, the strength of Wanwu Grotto Heaven was really terrifying. I didn't ask, but reminded myself that I shouldn't offend the Wang family when I didn't know anything about them. Of course, if I could maintain the so-called alliance of the 9 Cauldrons families, it would be good for me. I could use the Wang family's power to do many things. Although Officer Wang was arrogant and had a childish temperament, he had regarded me as a member of the 9 Cauldrons families. He had said that if Lu Xingyang wanted to kill me, he would have to go through the Wong family first. Since I wanted to follow the Wong family, I followed Officer Wong's arrangement and stayed here to rest while waiting for Ah Fu and Ah Shou to recover. The inside of the blood coffin was a strange space. Although it was very big, it was different from the outside world. There was no sun rising or setting, no moon rising or setting. There was only an endless blood mist that lingered around. I couldn't tell whether it was day or night. I couldn't tell the exact time, but I guessed that it would take at least 3 days for Ah Fu and Ah Shou to fully recover. While waiting for them to recover, I gathered with the fat man and talked about what had happened after we parted. Their experience was simple. They had returned to Mount Huangwenxin to recuperate until the Yinzhou cauldron sent them a message. Then they set off to this place. Speaking of the Yinzhou cauldron, the fat man's father had to tell me about their family. When I was a child, the fat man had told me about the rumor that their family had 9 generations of corner families. Although they were a corner family, they were actually the 9 cauldrons families that had inherited the 9 cauldrons. The name of corner was just an alias of the 9 cauldrons families. The inheritance of the Yinzhou cauldron didn't belong to the Lin family. It had been passed down for thousands of years. Several hundred years ago, the ancestor of the Lin family had obtained it, and it had been passed down for 9 generations. According to their ancestor, the existence of the 9 cauldrons families wasn't to pass down the 9 cauldrons, but to find their master. The 9 cauldrons could find the master's aura and appear in the place where the master would appear, waiting quietly. The 9 generations were like a cycle. If the 9 cauldrons couldn't find their master, they would capture the master's aura and go to the next place. They would stay in another family and continue to wait. That was why the inheritance of 9 generations wasn't a contract. It was just the time for the 9 cauldrons to wait for their master. After telling me that, Lin Aching looked at me with his bright eyes. Did you really just control the Qingzhou cauldron? I shook my head and briefly told him about the Qingzhou cauldron. Lin Aching nodded and didn't say anything else. However, the way he looked at me was mixed with some inexplicable thoughts. I knew that he thought of me as the master that the 9 cauldrons were waiting for. I didn't know the answer to this question, so I naturally couldn't answer him. However, since everyone had spoken openly, I hesitated for a moment before asking him why he had come back to life in the Fire God Temple, why he had cultivated shaman energy, and if there was any hidden reason why he had suddenly appeared with Bayan in the depths of the Fire God Temple. Lin Aching had always been a man of few words, but after hearing my question, he quickly told me that he didn't know the reason why he had come back to life in the Fire God Temple. The 9 generations wrath was a secret technique passed down in the 9 cauldrons families. It didn't need to be sacrificed, but his cultivation was too low. He could only borrow the power of the 8 ancestors and his own life to use the secret technique. When he had come back to life in the Fire God Temple, there was no one around him. He had walked for a long time before he met Bayan. After talking to him, he understood the situation between Bayan and me. Bayan helped him get out of the Fire God Temple and gave him the handkerchief to bring to me. As for why he cultivated shaman energy, the answer was even simpler. It was because the 9 cauldrons families cultivated shaman energy. There was shaman energy in the 9 cauldrons. Lin Aching had used the 9 cauldrons to cultivate shaman energy since he was young, but his cultivation was very low. He was only in the dragon-seeking realm. In addition, he knew that shaman energy was the public enemy of the metaphysics world, so he had always hidden it and never revealed it. After he had come back to life in the Fire God Temple, his cultivation had skyrocketed and reached the glorious consciousness realm. However, that was all. He hadn't made any progress after that. As for the fatty, the inheritance of the Yinzhou cauldron had been exhausted after 9 generations. Lin Aching had never let him cultivate Taoist techniques, nor had he inherited shaman energy. I had thought too much about the last question. There was more than one exit in the Fire God Temple. That year, Lin Aching had left through another exit. When he had gone to find me, he had also left through another exit. It was just a coincidence that he had met Bayan earlier than I had expected. After listening to all the answers, the only thing that shocked me was that all the members of the 9 cauldrons families cultivated shaman energy. I had thought that only Nan Gong and I cultivated shaman energy in the metaphysics world. Now, it seemed that it wasn't that simple. However, I recalled that when Fu and the others had fought with Lu Jinyang, they hadn't sensed any waves of shaman energy. I purposely went to ask Wang Can. The answer I got was that the Wang family did cultivate shaman energy, but Fu and the others only cultivated Taoist energy. Shaman energy was a secret inheritance of the family. Fu and the others didn't have the qualifications to cultivate it. After understanding this, I asked the fatty a few more questions. For example, the relationship between Nan Gong and his master, Jinrenguan, and why he didn't know about the solar eclipse in the back mountain of Metaphysics Society. The fatty didn't know the relationship between Nan Gong and Jinrenguan. As for the appearance of Raha back then, Fatty had a confused look on his face. He said that he didn't know either. Normally, astronomical phenomena like solar eclipses were something that he specialized in researching. However, during those few days, he didn't realize this matter at all. In fact, it didn't even appear in his mind. After that, he also felt that something was wrong. However, he still couldn't figure out why. He could only guess that someone had blocked his senses. It was a power of a higher principle that he couldn't understand. Since the fatty couldn't understand it, I naturally couldn't either. Anyway, this matter was over. I shook my head and put it aside. I didn't think about it anymore. After Fu and Shou had fully recovered, we decided to continue to the depths of the blood maple forest. The plan was the same as before. We would use Fu's cultivation base to let him go in first. After he had lured out the blood spirit guards, we would fight them and then act according to the situation. It would be good if we could go in directly. If we couldn't, Fu could take us in batches. However, it was strange that Fu came out not long after he had gone in. He told us that he had waited for half an hour in the blood maple forest, but the blood spirit guards didn't show up. At first, he thought that the area he had entered was too shallow. He purposely moved forward several kilometers until he was close to the War God Mountain. However, he still didn't see the blood spirit guards. He then hurried to report to us. After hearing this news, I didn't feel happy. I was a little surprised. Chapter 521. I wasn't the only one who thought of this. After hearing the news, Officer Wang's face darkened. He raised his eyes and stared at the front. After a long time, he snorted. Holy Mountain Paradise! Lu Jinyang. Obviously, the Lu family and Lu Jinyang had been deeply engraved in his mind. They had become a thorn in his flesh. Of course, in addition to resentment, there was more fear on his face. When this young master from the heavenly abode first saw me, he sighed with emotion that there were geniuses in the outside world. However, after experiencing Lu Jinyang's matter, he couldn't be arrogant anymore. He even seemed a little discouraged. He came here for the inheritance of Chiyu. Not to mention that he was discouraged. Even I didn't think he would win. He had Afu and other young god celestial masters under his command and the Yujo cauldron in his hand. It seemed that he was confident, but Lu Jinyang's strength was comparable to Afu's, and he had the Chiyu axe. No matter what, Officer Wang was not at an advantage. With Wang Can's status, it was easy to speculate that before he came here, he must have had full confidence in his heart. But after arriving here, the situation was completely different from what he had expected. The gap was so big that no one could accept it easily. Most people's lives were not what they wanted. Officer Wang, who was born with a silver spoon in his mouth, might have experienced this feeling for the first time. Vaguely, he seemed to have calmed down a lot and was no longer frivolous. He said to Ah Fu in a calm tone, "In that case, let's go in together." After saying that, he took a step forward and led the others to the depths of the blood maple forest. I smiled faintly from behind and followed. Unlike Officer Wang, although I was also interested in the so-called inheritance of Chiyu, I didn't come here for it. I came here for two reasons. First, it was on the way, and second, I wanted to see what this place had to do with me. I heard that there were three ultimate problems in philosophy. Who am I? Where do I come from? And where am I going? These three problems were broad, and they were three propositions about life, death, and self-cognition. But when it came to me at this time, these three problems were narrow. Ever since I embarked on the path of cultivation and came into contact with those ancient myths and legends, I no longer knew who I was. I didn't even know where I came from or where I was going. Therefore, compared to Chio's inheritance, I'm more interested in getting an answer to those 3 questions. With such thoughts in mind, I followed the group into the depths of the blood maple forest. The situation was just as Afu had said. After we had traveled for a long time, there wasn't a single blood spirit guard in the blood maple forest. However, the blood mist that enveloped the surroundings didn't dissipate at all. It still dyed the entire world blood red, making people feel an indescribable chill in their hearts. Along the way, Officer Wang asked everyone to search around, trying to find traces of the fight between Lu Jinyang and the blood spirit guards. He wanted to judge Lu Jinyang's current state. Of course, it would be best if they could find traces of Lu Jinyang. Based on Lu Jinyang's appearance that day, even if he'd left some sort of trump card behind and fought a fierce battle with 3 blood soul guards, Lu Jinyang would surely be like an arrow at the end of its flight now. So it would be best if they were able to find traces of him, pursue him, and seize the opportunity to take his life. That was what Officer Wang thought, and I also thought the same. Lu Jinyang was my archenemy. I had long passed the age where I wanted to defeat my enemy in a dignified manner. As long as I could kill Lu Jinyang, I wouldn't reject any despicable means, let alone taking advantage of his weakness. Unfortunately, things didn't go our way. Although we had tried our best to search, we hadn't found any traces of him. The blood maple forest was quiet, as if no one had intruded. Not long after, a continuous shadow appeared on the top of the tall maple tree in front of us. According to Officer Wang and Ah Fu's description, that should be the War God Mountain. Chio's inheritance was on the War God Mountain. Seeing that the War God Mountain was in sight, Officer Wang's spirit was lifted. His mood, which had been affected by Lu Jinyang's attack, had finally recovered. His eyes were filled with piety, as if he was worshipping a saint. He put his palms together and bowed to the War God Mountain. He softly chanted, "Saint, please bless the 9 cauldrons and the Wang family. Help me get the War God's inheritance and the War God's treasure." This was the 2nd time he had mentioned the word saint. I couldn't help but turn to look at Lin Aching. From his previous strange look, it was possible that he had regarded me as the saint that the 9 cauldrons had been waiting for. I thought mischievously, if I'm really the saint, seeing Officer Wang praying so piously, I should give him the Chio's inheritance and the War God's treasure. No, that's not right. The fat father and son are also from the 9 cauldrons. They are also here for the Chio's inheritance. Considering our relationship, it's better to give it to the fat father. At most, we can have one each, I thought leisurely. After entering the blood coffin, the air was filled with an ancient and desolate aura. The closer we got to War God Mountain, the thicker the aura became. Not only that, but the surroundings also seemed solemn and dignified, as though some kind of god was watching us from afar. Under such an atmosphere, everyone's mood became solemn. No one talked, and just hurried on with their journey. There's a saying that a horse can run to death if it's looking at a mountain, but we didn't feel that way at this moment. We didn't travel for too long before the War God Mountain appeared in front of us. I even saw an enormous statue in front of the War God Mountain. The statue had 2 horns on its head and a bull's head. It had a pair of wings on its back. It held a giant axe in its right hand and a 3-legged, round-bellied copper pot in its left hand. It stood in front of the mountain, looking disdainfully at all directions. Compared to the Chiyu statue in the square where we had entered, the difference between the two was more than 10,000 miles. It was obvious that this statue was the war god whose fame had spread through the ages. When we saw this statue, we couldn't help but stop and admire it for a long time. I turned to look at Officer Wang. His eyes gradually shifted to the giant axe in Chiyo's hand. He looked envious and angry. Apparently, his mind was still on Lu Jinyang. After glancing at the giant axe in Lu Jinyang's hand, I shifted my eyes to the copper pot in Chiyo's statue's other hand. It was said that Chiyu had the demon refining pot, which ranked 4th among the 10 great divine weapons in the antiquity time. Was it this copper pot? Officer Wong had mentioned the war god's top treasure, so it was most likely this one. In the legends, the demon refining pot was also called the Julie pot. It had incredible power. It was said that it could duplicate everything in the world and had a terrifying destructive power. There was a strange space inside the pot, which was so big that it could contain the entire world. Although I already had the Xinyuan sword, I couldn't help but be tempted by such a top treasure. However, although I was tempted, my mind was still rational. Among the people who had entered the blood coffin, Lu Jinyang was the one who was most likely to get this top treasure. Previously, he had only obtained the Qiyu axe, which wasn't ranked among the divine weapons. If he also got the demon refining pot, what would happen to him? After thinking about this, my goal changed from getting the demon refining pot to stopping Lu Jinyang from getting it. While I was thinking, Officer Wong's voice came to my ears. I guess he was also thinking about Chiyo's inheritance and the demon refining pot. His voice was much more excited. He shouted at us, asking us to speed up and go to the statue of Chiyu. Looking at the god of war mountain from a distance, we couldn't see the path on the mountain. Going to the statue was the best choice. We didn't have any objection. We sped up and went to the statue. With our speed, we arrived at the foot of the statue after a quarter of an hour. Only when he got closer and looked at the statue again did he truly feel how majestic it was. Not to mention the towering statue, the two legs standing on the ground were several meters in diameter. When we stood next to the feet, they were only a little bit higher than our toes. Everybody couldn't help but sigh in admiration at the size of the statue. For a moment, we even put Chiyo's inheritance aside. However, while we were looking at the statue, we suddenly heard a familiar hoarse voice. "Zhou-yi, I've been waiting for you for a long time. You're finally here." The voice came from behind the statue's thick legs. After hearing it, all of us stopped talking. We exchanged looks. Fu and Shou walked in the front, and we followed behind them. We carefully walked behind the statue's legs. After going around the foot of the statue, a cave suddenly appeared in front of them. Lu Jinyang was standing on a rock in the cave, still in the same sorry state as before. The two heavenly masters who followed him were also standing behind him at this moment, looking no different from before. However, at this moment, no one in the crowd was looking at him. Everyone was staring at an empty space not far away from him. In that empty space, there were 9 illusory blood-red figures. These blood-red figures were about 3 meters tall. They were thin and strong, and each of them held a long blood-red blade. They were the blood spirit guards. All of us here, including Lu Jinyang's group, made a total of 9 people. 9 people corresponded to 9 blood spirit guards. It wasn't a big deal, but the scary thing was that the 9 blood spirit guards weren't standing on the ground. Instead, they were kneeling there like loyal servants. The person they were kneeling to, or rather, the person they were loyal to, was Lu Jinyang, who was sitting in front of them. Chapter 5:22. When we got here and the blood spirit guards didn't show up, I knew something was wrong. However, the worst-case scenario was that Lu Jinyang wasn't dead and had defeated the blood spirit guards. I hadn't expected the current situation. Looking at the blood spirit guards kneeling in a row, I couldn't help but feel scared. There were 9 Yang God celestial masters and Lu Jinyang, let alone us. Even if Wang Can's subordinates, Fu, Lu, Shou, Shi, and Kai, were here, I wouldn't be able to defeat them. What should I do? My brain was working hard, but I couldn't think of any solution. I turned to look at Wang Can. At this moment, he didn't have his usual arrogant look. His eyes were full of despair. Facing these blood spirit guards, let alone fighting them, we didn't even have a chance to escape. Since we could see that, Lu Jinyang could also see that, so he wasn't in a hurry to attack us. Instead, he lazily sat there with his back against the mountain wall. His terrifying face revealed a smile as he looked at me and asked, "How is it, Zhou-yi? Did you think that I would die at the hands of the blood spirit guards after tricking me into coming here? I have to say, you're really naive. I have a Qiyu tomahawk in my hand. I'm a master of this place, and they're my slaves. How could they kill me?" Although Lu Jinyang had experienced a lot and had changed a lot, there was one thing that hadn't changed. He still liked to show off. His ugly face looked smug, which made people hate him. What I didn't understand was that it was Wang Qin who had tricked him to come here. Why did he blame me? I guessed that I was the only one in his eyes. After experiencing so many things, he was still alive. Lu Jinyang's hatred for me was no less than my hatred for him. I gently nodded. You're right. We were really naive. We didn't think about the relationship between the Chiyu tomahawk and the Chiyu tomahawk. Anyway, how did you get the Chiyu tomahawk? Not only did your cultivation base recover, but it also increased a lot. Is it all because of the good fortune you got in the royal tomb of the Shang dynasty? On the one hand, I really wanted to know what he had experienced. On the other hand, I wanted to stall for time. In this situation, the only hope I could think of was that when Wang Qin sent Kai back, he had instructed him to call more people over. Although he didn't know when those people would come, and even if they came, they wouldn't be a match for the Blood Spirit Guards. At this moment, this tiny bit of hope was his only hope. I could only stall for time and hope for a miracle. Oh, you actually don't know? Didn't that person tell you? Lu Jinyang seemed to be interested all of a sudden. He sat up a little straighter and grinned. Interesting. That person risked his life to get that thing for you. But he didn't tell you about me. What's your relationship with him? What does he have to do with Nangong? I hesitated and shook my head. I'm not sure. I'm not that familiar with him. What did you say? Not familiar? Lu Jinyang's eyes widened, and he suddenly laughed maniacally. You're not familiar with him, but he actually risked his life to get that thing for you? Zhou Yi, why is your life always so good? In the beginning, Yi Pianpian was on your side, the old president was on your side, Han Wenan and Zhang Kanwen were all helping you, and now this Wangwu Grotto Heaven is also helping you. And that person, haha, even a stranger is desperately helping you. His eyes were filled with infinite hatred, and he continued, why didn't anyone help me? At the Young Phoenix gathering, you broke one of my arms, and no one helped me. Later, in the obsidian stone competition, I was almost killed by you, and my cultivation was destroyed, but no one helped me. Even in the Yinshang royal tomb, no one helped me kill you. Not only did no one help me, but even my grandfather couldn't help me kill you, because you were under the care of the old president. What could I do? I could only enter the blood sacrifice cave and become a flesh sacrifice. I originally thought that I would die, but unfortunately, even the heavens seem to be unable to continue watching this unfairness. In the blood sacrifice cave, my cultivation is the lowest, but the heavens finally gave me a chance to compete fairly. I killed everyone, cleansed my marrow, and restored my cultivation. Although I turned into a vengeful spirit, I still managed to walk to the end of the Shang King's divine palace with a body full of flesh and blood. Shang King Divine Palace? What is that place? I frowned. Back in the Yinshang royal tomb, the celestial masters and I finally reached the fourth door, which was a sacrificial hall. All the celestial masters fought to the death with the sacrificial evil spirit. After that, I left that place and never heard anyone mention the Shang King Divine Palace. Lu Jinyang's face was a little intoxicated, and he said in a daze, the legendary Shang King Divine Palace. This is probably the luckiest time of my life. I managed to walk to the front door of the Shang King Divine Palace alive. As long as I push open the door, the thing inside will be mine. As long as I get that thing, all the previous unfairness will be nothing. But wait for me to push open the door. Wait for me to push open the door. Lu Jinyang's face became ferocious, and he stared at me fiercely. Do you know what's wrong? There's already someone inside. Haha, I went through a lot of hardships to get there, and in the end, someone has already arrived one step ahead of me. Moreover, this person is the person who has always been by your side, Zhou Yi. He took that thing. He panted heavily, and his eyes looked as though he was about to devour someone. And he said word by word, why, Zhou Yi, why? Why do I have to live in your nightmare forever? Can't I ever escape? Lu Jinyang was very angry, and he sounded very miserable, but after listening to his words, I only sneered in my heart. There would always be some people who would push all the blame onto others. At the young Phoenix gathering, he targeted me and wanted to kill me, so I counterattacked and broke his arm. Next, he killed my parents and destroyed my cultivation. Later, in the obsidian stone competition, he could kill me, so naturally, I could also kill him. Victory and defeat were all fated, so how could I be blamed? As for the matter he mentioned, when the treasure appeared, there would naturally be competition. If he could compete for it, why couldn't Nangong compete for it? The only coincidence was that the things he experienced were all related to me. Perhaps from his point of view, I was indeed his nightmare. But wasn't he also my nightmare? Ever since I embarked on the path of cultivation, he was the first enemy I encountered, and he had put me at death's door several times. If it wasn't for my luck, I'm afraid I would have been killed by him many times already, but now, you're blaming me. I shook my head. As the saying goes, a just cause enjoys abundant support, while an unjust cause finds little support. Lu Xingyang, why are there people helping me, but no one helping you? You should find a reason from yourself. Ask yourself, in the several battles between the two of us, were you always the one forcing me? If you want to harm me, you should be prepared to be harmed. That's only fair. What's more, you speak so miserably, but in fact, you're the heir of the Lu family in the capital. Since you were young, someone has guided you in your cultivation. Even after experiencing so many things, and finally obtaining the Chiyu battle axe, and having such a high cultivation, the heavens aren't unfair to you at all. Ha ha! Lu Xingyang suddenly laughed wildly. Not unfair at all? My current appearance is neither human nor ghost. Not unfair at all? The Chiyu battle axe, ha ha! This Chiyu battle axe was just something I picked up at the entrance of the Shang King's temple. How can it be compared to that item? The item he was referring to was naturally the Xianyuan sword. However, I was curious. Why was he so sure that Nangong had given the Xianyuan sword to me? I opened my mouth and asked, "How do you know about the Xianyuan sword?" Before I could finish my sentence, Lu Xingyang suddenly shouted and interrupted me. "Don't say it! Don't say it!" He panted heavily. Ever since I left the Shang King's temple, every time I hear those words, I go crazy with jealousy. Before obtaining that item, you're not allowed to say its name in front of me. Chapter 5:23. I couldn't deny that I was tempted. Lu Xingyang knew how precious the Xianyuan sword was, but I knew it even better. However, I wasn't Lu Xingyang. After experiencing so many things, I value my life more. Lu Xingyang might be able to give up everything for power, even if he had to lose his life, but I couldn't. So what if I lost my life and obtained the world? From this point, Lu Xingyang was a much purer person than me. However, I wasn't willing to give up. I was a greedy person. As long as there was a chance, I would want to have it both ways. I kept silent for a while and didn't answer his question. Instead, I asked him, "How can you be sure that the item is with me?" Lu Xingyang sneered. "Of course it's with you. When I saw that person, I knew that he was here to take that item for you. Besides you, who else could appear at such a coincidental time to ruin my hope when I was so close to success? Only you." I couldn't help but frown. Lu Xingyang's thoughts were completely twisted. Maybe he treated me as his destiny, but I wasn't a person who believed in fate. No one lived for others. Their own matters were always related to themselves. Lu Xingyang seemed to have seen through my thoughts. He stared at me and smiled. "Actually, that item is with you, isn't it?" I was momentarily speechless. He was right. The Xianyuan sword was with me. I instinctively wanted to deny it, but from his expression, it was obvious that he wouldn't waver no matter if I admitted it or not. Rather than waiting for him to kill me and then take the Xianyuan sword from me, I might as well admit it now. That's it. Make a decision. Do you want your life or that item? Lu Xingyang questioned me again. I really wanted to take out the Xianyuan sword, but my rationality told me that the person sitting in front of me was a lunatic. If I believe him, then I would be a lunatic too. If it was me, I definitely wouldn't reason with Lu Xingyang or talk about honesty. Similarly, Lu Xingyang wouldn't keep his promise to me. Whether I handed over the Xianyuan sword or not, Lu Xingyang wouldn't let me go. I looked at Lu Xingyang and suddenly laughed. "You are a madman. Coincidentally, I'm also a madman. You should know that madmen don't care about their lives. My answer wasn't out of Lu Xinyang's expectations. He looked up at me with surprise in his eyes. Very good. Now I can confirm that the item is on you. With that, he suddenly waved his hand and shouted, "Blood Spirit Guards, attack. Kill this man." Was it finally time to fight for his life? I clenched my fists and my eyes were bloodshot. Even though I knew I wasn't a match for him, I definitely wouldn't sit and wait for my death. I'm already prepared. No matter what Qilin Gu it is, I'm going to forcefully break through to the heavenly master realm. Even if I die, I'm going to bite Lu Xingyang. However, right when I was ready to risk my life, Officer Wang's voice suddenly echoed in my ears. The 9 Cauldron clans are of the same breath and branches. If you want to kill him, you have to ask our Wang clan first. As he spoke, he waved his hand. Fu and Shou, who were standing behind him, stepped forward. Officer Wang also took a few steps forward and stood side by side with me. At this moment, the 9 blood spirit guards on the ground had stood up. Lu Xingyang stretched his hand to stop them and asked Officer Wang with interest, "Do you want to die with him?" Officer Wang was so angry that he burst into laughter. He said coldly, "Your Excellency, you are too arrogant. Whether I want to die or not, we will know after we try." You see, Lu Xingyang ignored him and turned to look at me again. "Now, there is someone who will help you. He will risk his life to help you. Zhou Yi, you always have such a good life." I was speechless. He was the meat on the chopping block, but he said that I had a good life. I didn't know what to say. However, I turned to look at Officer Wang. I didn't understand what was going on. The current situation was completely different from when we were outside. Lu Xingyang's power was enough to crush all of us. But Officer Wang had stood up for me again. I couldn't believe it. Of course I was touched. No matter if he did it for me or for the 9 cauldrons, as Lu Xingyang had said, he was helping me. In this situation, it was enough to move me. Without waiting for us to speak, Lu Xingyang waved his hand again. This time, the 9 blood spirit guards swarmed toward us. I smiled bitterly. Lu Xingyang was right. Officer Wang stood up for me, but he was going to die with me. There were 9 blood spirit guards at the Yang God, Celestial Master level. We didn't stand a chance. Fu could defeat one, and Shou could resist one. However, Officer Wang and I couldn't hurt any of them even if we risked our lives, let alone defeat them. Right when I took a deep breath, Officer Wang pulled me and Yao Yao and said, "Stand behind me." He pulled Yao Yao behind him. Subconsciously, I moved 2 steps backward. When I looked up, I saw Officer Wang take out a short sword from somewhere. The short sword was black and only 1 meter long. Officer Wang held it in his hand, but he didn't use it to fight the enemies. Instead, he turned the hilt around and stabbed the short sword into the ground. At this moment, the 9 blood spirit guards were in front of us. Officer Wang didn't panic. He lowered his head and looked at the black short sword, chanting a complicated spell. At the same time, Fu and Shou didn't take action. They stood behind Officer Wang. It seemed they trusted him. My heart was beating fast, but when I saw their calm faces, I calmed down. As the master of Wangwu Wonderland, Officer Wang's life was much more precious than mine. If he wasn't worried, he must have a foolproof plan. I wasn't wrong. The blood spirit guards were fast. However, when they arrived in front of us, the black dagger stabbed into the ground in front of Officer Wang suddenly released a wisp of black smoke. In just a blink of an eye, the black smoke hovered around us and formed a black cocoon. The blood spirit guards had arrived. Without saying anything, the 9 of them raised their blood blades and slashed at the black light cocoon. It was equivalent to a Yang God Celestial Master's attack. However, after 9 muffled sounds, the black light cocoon didn't even shake. It easily blocked the blood spirit guard's attack. Although I had guessed that Officer Wang had a way to resist the attack, I was still shocked when I saw the black light cocoon block the attack so easily. It was the joint attack of 9 Yang God Celestial Masters. Officer Wang's black short sword looked ordinary, but it had such a powerful defense. I guessed that it was an inherited treasure of Wangwu Wonderland. Lu Xingyang looked at the scene from afar. He didn't show any expression on his disgusting face. He just squeezed out 2 words, "Continue." The blood spirit guards weren't humans, so they didn't have any feelings. They raised their blood blades and continuously slashed at the black light cocoon. After more than 10 minutes, the 9 blood spirit guards had slashed countless times, but the black light cocoon didn't show any sign of breaking. I didn't look happy when I saw that the defensive magic tool was so tough. Although the black light cocoon was powerful, the blood spirit guards were even more powerful. According to the visual observation, the blood spirit guards had used up all their strength every time they waved their blood-red long blades. Even a young god celestial master would feel a little tired after more than 10 minutes of continuous all-out attacks, and his attacks would slow down slightly. However, the attacks of the 9 blood spirit guards were the same as before. They didn't show any signs of fatigue. In other words, the power of the blood spirit guards was inexhaustible in the blood maple forest. Their power was inexhaustible, while the power of the defensive magic tool would eventually be exhausted. It wasn't hard to predict the final outcome. I raised my head to look at Officer Wong. He seemed to have noticed it too. He frowned and didn't look happy either. It was an unsolvable problem, and no one could think of a solution. No one knew how long the black light cocoon could last. We could only wait for the moment it was broken. Soon, 10 minutes passed. Half an hour passed. When it was almost 1 hour, something flashed in front of me. The black light cocoon rippled. Finally, there was some movement. Officer Wong's face turned pale. Lu Jinyang, who was standing behind the blood spirit guards and watching us, raised the corners of his mouth. He returned to the place where he had been sitting and observed leisurely. What should we do? Officer Wong had come to help us because he had the defensive magic tool. Once the black light cocoon was broken, he wouldn't be able to deal with it. Indeed, Officer Wong had just bought us some time. Under the suppression of absolute power, we wouldn't be able to escape death. It was said that the spirit of the first drum would be exhausted after the second. At first, I had the heart to die. However, after being protected by the black light cocoon for a long time, my desire to live had faded, and my desire to live had become stronger. However, my fate wasn't in my own hands. The stronger my desire to live, the deeper my despair became. The black light cocoon shook more violently, and our faces became gloomier. On the other side, Lu Jinyang's lips curled up more and more. Another 10 minutes later, the black cocoon not only shook violently, but even its color began to fade. The black dagger in front of Wong can also began to tremble slightly, making a buzzing sound as if it was crying in a low voice. It seemed that the situation was irreversible. The 9 blood spirit guards seemed to have received some kind of order. They stopped attacking at the same time. I thought it was Lu Jinyang's order. I lifted my head and saw that Lu Jinyang was as surprised as I was. I looked at the faces of the blood spirit guards. At this moment, the 9 of them were moving at the same time. Their heads were raised a lot, and their eyes were looking at the war god mountain. Before I could figure out what was going on, I heard a sound next to my ear. Thump, thump, thump. 3 war drums sounded at the same time. Each beat seemed to hit my heart, making me shiver. Lu Jinyang looked at the blood spirit guards suspiciously. However, when he heard the drums, he jumped up from the rock. Just like the blood spirit guards, he gazed at the war god mountain. At the same time, Officer Wong's voice arose. Chapter 524. Chio's inheritance had begun, except for Yao Yao and me. All the people who had come here were here for Chio's inheritance. When they heard the Jili war drum, they all stopped what they were doing. After we got a hold of ourselves, Officer Wong and I exchanged looks. Then, we turned to look at Lu Jinyang in the distance. Although the black cocoon of light had already begun to tremble and fade, anyone could tell that this protective ritual implement could still hold out for a while longer. Chio's legacy had already been opened, and everyone wanted to go up War God Mountain to check on the situation, but they could not wait any longer. At this moment, Lu Jinyang retracted his eyes from War God Mountain and looked at us. After looking at each other for a while, Lu Jinyang spoke first. The war god's inheritance has begun. How about we stop here and go up the mountain together? He didn't ask Officer Wong, but just stared at me. Apparently, he was asking for my opinion. I understood that he wasn't afraid of me. He didn't ask me to stop here, but to go up the mountain together. He was afraid that I would seize the chance to run away. From his hatred for me, it was hard to tell which was more important, killing me or getting Chiyo's inheritance. If we continued to delay, we would have a chance to wait for the experts of the Wong family to come and help us. That was why I nodded after hesitating for a while. After I agreed, Lu Jinyang turned his eyes to Officer Wong. Officer Wong was decisive. He retrieved the black light cocoon and pulled out the black short sword from the ground. Then, let's go up the mountain. After we reached an agreement, we didn't linger. Officer Wong and I took Yao Yao, Fu, and the others with us. Lu Jinyang brought his 2 heavenly masters and 9 blood spirit guards behind us. It was obvious that Lu Jinyang wanted to supervise us. Under the formidable power of the 9 blood spirit guards, I didn't have a chance to run away. That was why I didn't think about it and headed up the mountain. Battle God Mountain was extremely tall, and the slope was extremely steep. More importantly, as they advanced, they could clearly feel a kind of pressure on their bodies. It was as if the ground had an additional suction force, and it was as if the air had become heavier. Every time they lifted their legs, it would be much heavier. Fortunately, our cultivation base wasn't weak, and we hadn't consumed much of our strength in the previous battle. We climbed up the mountain fast. Shortly after, we reached the same height as the head of Chiyo's statue. At this point, there was only the highest part of the mountain in front of them. If they climbed up, they would reach the top. I walked at the front and looked up at the peak of the mountain. I could vaguely see a platform at the top of the mountain. The platform was lush and green, and there seemed to be some short saplings growing on it. I shaded my eyes with my hand, but I couldn't see clearly. I continued to ascend. After walking for a short while, everyone reached the top of the mountain. I was also the first to climb up. Looking around, I saw that it was indeed a small plaza. However, the lush greenery that I saw earlier wasn't short saplings, but rows of human-shaped statues. These human statues were made of clay and looked simple and crude. Their faces were blurry, but the horned helmets on their heads and the colorful cloth wrapped around their bodies were very clear. The platform was about 1,000 square meters. Dozens of rows of clay statues were arranged neatly, like soldiers waiting to be inspected. Their heads were all slightly raised, facing the southwest of the platform. There was a small platform there, about 2 square meters. The floor of the platform was engraved with the trigrams formed by the yin and yang lines. The yin and yang lines were the long and short lines that made up the 8 trigrams. The yin line was made up of 2 short lines, and the yang line was a long straight line. There were 2 trigrams carved on the ground. The top one was the yang line, and the second and third were the yin lines. It was the zhen trigram of the 8 trigrams. The next one was the yin line, and the middle one was the yang line, which was the kin trigram. Zhen was the thunder, and kan was the water. The zhen trigram was the kan trigram of the Book of Changes. This was the jie trigram of the 64 trigrams of the Book of Changes. The jie trigram benefits the southwest, no destination, its arrival, good fortune. There's a long journey, good fortune. Looking at this trigram, I remembered the record I had read in the book. After Chiyu was defeated, he was dismembered by the Yellow Emperor. That was why he was called the Jie God. According to the legends, the Jie trigram of the Book of Changes was designed for Chiyu. However, Chiyu's tomb was built in the remote antiquity era, and the Book of Changes was written in the Zhou dynasty. Why was there a trigram of the Book of Changes here? While I was thinking about these questions, a gust of wind suddenly blew on the platform. At first, the wind was small, but after a short while, it became violent. I lowered my head to look at the bottom of the mountain. The blood maple forest, which stretched as far as the eye could see, was swaying crazily. The wind surged, and a large amount of blood mist gathered on the platform at the top of the mountain. In just half a minute, the blood-colored sky and earth seemed to have dimmed. On the contrary, the platform we were standing on had turned into a blood-colored sea. The thick blood mist had been swept to this place. When I looked up, it was as though I was standing in a blood-colored sea. I could only see the vague silhouettes of the clay statues. Fortunately, this situation didn't last for a long time. The wind didn't stop. It carried the blood mist and continued to move. Eventually, it gathered on the innermost platform. After the gale stopped, the thunder rain trigram on the high platform moved. The yin-yang trigram on it was like the mouth of a giant whale. It suddenly emitted a huge suction force, and in the blink of an eye, it swallowed the thick black blood mist that had shrunk into a ball. At the same time, the thunderstorm trigram turned blood red. It seemed to have a layer of rainbow light on it. Spirit lights were constantly moving inside it. It looked as if the trigram had come to life. The huge commotion finally stopped. We stood at the edge of the platform and looked at each other. We were hesitating whether we should move forward or go closer to the platform. Before we could make a decision, the place that had just calmed down started to move again. The statues that had been standing on the ground like dead trees suddenly leaned forward and prostrated. It looked like they were kneeling at the same time to salute the platform. I didn't know why, but looking at the kneeling statues, all of us felt an indescribable sense of respect. Our knees trembled, and we almost knelt down to salute them. However, before we could react, the 9 blood spirit guards beside Lu Jinyang moved first. Their bodies flashed, and they arrived at the center of the square. They prostrated in front of the platform and prostrated themselves as if they were worshiping their god. After they knelt down, the trigram on the platform changed again. The 6 blood-red yin and yang trigrams seemed to spit out the blood mist that they had just absorbed. At the same time, the war drums that we had heard at the foot of the mountain sounded again. Dong, dong, dong. At the same time, in the midst of the war drums, there was a long and desolate chant. Bathing in the orchid soup is fragrant. Flowering clothes are like flowers. The spirit is curled up and remains. The rotting light is not yet over. The Jiangwo palace shines with the light of the sun and the moon. The dragon rides on the emperor's robe and talks about Zhouzhang, the spirit king, and Huang she has surrendered. The lord of the clouds is far away in the clouds. Looking at Jizhou, I have more than enough. Crossing the 4 seas, I am not poor. Thinking of my husband, I am tired and worried. This voice was empty and panicked. It was as if it came from the ancient times and had been chanting for tens of thousands of years. In this chanting voice that carried the aura of time, the 6 yin and yang trigrams spat out more and more blood mist. Gradually, they formed 6 separate clusters of blood mist in the sky above the trigram. At first, we couldn't see anything wrong with these blood mist clusters. However, when the chanting voice stopped, the outlines of the 6 blood-red gates were revealed. There were 6 lines of the trigram, 2 yang and 4 yin. The gate that appeared above the yang trigram was a perfectly round door. The gate above the yin trigram was broken in the middle. There were 2 pillars on both sides, but no beams. The 6 blood-red gates glowed with bloodlight. The door in the middle was deep and dark. When we looked at it, we felt as if our eyes were stuck in it. It was as if it was connected to the end of the universe. The sound of the war drums stopped, and the chanting stopped. The 9 of them stood rooted to the ground, deeply shocked. Only then did they look at each other. Their minds regained clarity, and they began to ponder. Since this was the place of Chiyo's inheritance, all the phenomena just now, including the sound of the war drums and the chanting of the songs, were naturally signs of the opening of the inheritance. Moreover, the 6 doors on the high platform were definitely the passageways to obtain the inheritance. However, there were 6 passages and only one part of the inheritance. With a little thought, they knew that among these 6 gates, only one path could lead to the real place of the inheritance. Lu Jinyang was the first to react. He pointed his finger and ordered one of his heavenly master subordinates to walk up the high platform. Without any obstruction, he walked to the first yin-line gate and walked in. After he entered, the first yin-line gate instantly disappeared in the air. Both the person and the gate disappeared. In other words, only 6 people could enter the 6 gates. Chapter 5:25. There were 6 gates and 9 people. Besides Lu Jinyang's celestial masters who had already entered, there were still 8 people and 5 gates. Wang Can, Lin Aching, and I exchanged glances before shifting our gazes to Lu Jinyang. Power determined the right to speak. Currently, the 9 blood spirit guards were still there. If Lu Jinyang interfered, none of us would be able to enter the inheritance gate. At that moment, Lu Jinyang's eyes were fixed on the remaining 5 blood-colored inheritance gates. He frowned and didn't seem to be in a hurry to enter. Since he wasn't in a hurry, I naturally wasn't in a hurry either. Chio's inheritance sounded very tempting, but I didn't have much interest in it. Speaking of inheritance, the death scripture was also an inheritance to me. Currently, regardless of whether it was Taoist aura or witchcraft aura, I hadn't reached the celestial master realm. If I coveted other things, it would only bring me more harm than good. Hence, my attitude toward the so-called Chio's inheritance was that if I obtained it, I would be lucky to obtain it. Lu Jinyang and I weren't in a hurry, but Wang Can was the first one who couldn't wait any longer. After all, there was only one Chio's inheritance. No one knew what the situation inside the blood-colored inheritance gate was like. It was purely dependent on luck. If there were other things to compete for after entering, the person who entered first would have a huge advantage. Wang Can asked Lu Jinyang, "There are still 5 inheritance gates left. If Brother Lu isn't in a hurry to enter, I'll enter first." He was testing Lu Jinyang's attitude. Lu Jinyang's current attitude was rather strange. He wasn't as fierce as before. Instead, he said faintly, "I didn't stop you. If you want to enter, just enter. Why are you asking me?" Lu Jinyang didn't interfere, which was naturally the best outcome. Hearing that, Wang Can couldn't help but look delighted. He turned to the few of us and said, "Let's not delay any further. Let's enter together. Fu and Shou, you two stay on guard outside. There are still 5 inheritance gates. Zhou Yi, Lin Hu, and Lin Aching. The 4 of us will enter together." After saying that, he secretly signaled to me. I understood what he meant. Facing the 9 blood spirit guards, only the mystical black dagger in his hand could block them for a while. Therefore, I couldn't separate from him. If he went in, I could only follow him. Otherwise, if I gave Lu Jinyang an opportunity, I would definitely die. I appreciated Wang Can's good intention, but I didn't know if Lu Jinyang would agree to let us enter the 4 inheritance gates. Secondly, Lu Jinyang must have his reasons. So, Lu Jinyang must have a reason to enter first. It might not be a good thing for him. While I was hesitating, the fat man, his son, and Officer Wang were already walking toward the blood-colored gate of inheritance. I couldn't be separated from them, so I gritted my teeth and followed them. It re-in, Yang's. Cans to the Yang's left, and said, "Kinzhou, Yang's bloodline king. I've see he didn't. He Zhehi Lu Ming, masters, Lu and Sun's spirits entered. Yang to be to enter. 2. The Ming, king, and Lu's masters he. I suddenly remembered that Lu Jianyang and the others had entered the blood sacrifice well in the royal tomb of the Shang dynasty. The situation they faced was similar to what I saw today. He must have had something special that made him stand out from the crowd. Today, facing a similar situation, Lu Jianyang's every move must have a deeper meaning. While I was thinking, I suddenly heard a muffled sound in front of me. I lifted my head and saw that the 5 blood Yang's inheritance gates were still there. The inheritance gate that had disappeared earlier suddenly reappeared. However, as soon as it appeared, it collapsed and turned into a thick blood mist. After the blood mist dispersed, a man's figure appeared in the gate. This person was the celestial master under Lu Jianyang who had entered earlier. At this moment, his eyes were closed and his clothes had turned red. His arms were raised horizontally and his muscles were bulging. On top of his head was a copper crown with bull horns. The crown was wide and dark black. At first glance, one could tell that it was unusually heavy. It was as if it was forged from meteorite iron. There were no carvings on it, only many uneven marks. The most mystical thing was the 2 bull horns on the copper crown. They were thick and curved, almost forming a perfect circle. They were also black in color, but the tips of the 2 horns, which were very close to each other, were constantly emitting silver lightning. After the lightning appeared, it didn't disperse. Instead, it moved along the crown and circulated around the person's body, making him look like the Lord of Thunder that had descended to the mortal world. Only when the surrounding blood mist had completely dispersed did the man suddenly open his eyes. Two small, snake-like bolts of lightning suddenly flashed in his pupils. Immediately after, the numerous bolts of lightning circulating around his body suddenly flowed back into the copper cowhorn crown on his head. The abnormality disappeared. He took a deep breath and jumped down from the high platform. With an unconcealable joy on his face, he quickly returned to Lu Jinyang's side. Seeing the abnormality, Officer Wang and the others stopped and turned to look at the situation. Lu Jinyang didn't seem surprised. After the person returned, he asked calmly, "How's the situation inside?" The copper crown with bull horns on the head of the Heavenly Master was obviously a treasure that he had obtained from the Inheritance Gate, from the statue of Qi Yu at the foot of the War God Mountain. It was most likely the copper crown with bull horns on Qi Yu's head. An item that could be worn by the ancient god of war, Qi Yu, was definitely not ordinary. It was not inferior to the Qi Yu axe in Lu Jinyang's hand. However, even after obtaining this miraculous treasure, the Heavenly Master was still extremely respectful towards Lu Jinyang. His attitude was no different from before. When he heard Lu Jinyang's question, he hurriedly bowed and answered. After I entered, I pushed open a door and saw a long, blood-red table. On top of the table was this copper horn crown. I picked it up and put it on my head. When I regained consciousness, I was back on the high platform. He explained his experience in a concise and comprehensive manner. It was extremely simple. However, after listening to him, Officer Wang and the others all frowned at the same time. It was obvious that the situation inside the Scarlet Inheritance Gate was completely different from what we had expected. Including me, we all thought that the Inheritance Gate was an opportunity to obtain the inheritance. After all, there is only one Chiyo's inheritance. However, from the description of this person, it was very likely that behind the 6 Scarlet Inheritance Gates were 6 kinds of things from Chiyo's inheritance, such as celestial artifacts or cultivation methods. If we wanted to obtain anything, we could only rely on luck. While we were pondering, Lu Jinyang took action. He still didn't hurry to enter the 2nd Inheritance Gate. Instead, he pointed at the 2nd Inheritance Gate and said to the Heavenly Master who had already obtained the copper crown with bull horns, "Try to see if you can enter the 2nd one." Hearing his words, our hearts tightened. We instantly understood what he meant. Of course, Lu Jinyang didn't want to let the Heavenly Master monopolize 2 of them. He was experimenting to see if the same person could enter the gate twice. If he could enter the gate, it was obvious that none of us would be able to touch the remaining 4 inheritance gates. I was still fine, but Officer Wang and the others' faces were extremely pale. They had traveled thousands of miles to get the inheritance, but in the end, they had come empty-handed. No one could accept that. However, the situation was not in their favor. Relying on the magical dagger in Officer Wang's hand, we could barely save our lives. No one had the ability to compete with Lu Jinyang. We could only watch helplessly. After the Heavenly Master received the order, he returned to the high platform and walked toward the 2nd gate. Fortunately, he didn't enter the gate. He seemed to have touched a barrier and couldn't take another step forward. Then, no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't break through the blood gate in front of him. Seeing this, all of us heaved a sigh of relief. As long as the same person couldn't enter more than once, Lu Jinyang wouldn't be able to occupy all the gates. We all had a chance. Lu Jinyang waved at the Heavenly Master to call him back. Then, he turned to the others and said, "There are 5 inheritance gates left. I only have 2 people with me, so the other 3 are yours." He spoke in a commanding tone, not bothering to be polite to us. Hearing this, all of us heaved a sigh of relief. Although it was different from the 4 gates that Officer Wang had envisioned, it was an excellent result under the circumstances. But in this way, one of the 4 of us will have to be sacrificed. After hesitating for a while, I was ready to give up. Officer Wang had saved me many times, so I couldn't ignore his kindness. I had a deep relationship with the fat father and son, so I didn't want to compete with them. Moreover, I didn't care about Chiyo's inheritance, so it didn't matter to me if I gave up. Just as I was about to speak, Lin Aching said, "I'm old. Even if I get the inheritance, what can I do? You three young people can go in. I give up." Chapter 5:26. I was stunned and wanted to step back, but Officer Wong had already stepped forward. Lin Aching simply turned around and walked toward Ah Fu and Ah Shou. The fatty and I looked at each other and then followed Officer Wong to the platform. Logically speaking, Lin Aching's words actually made a lot of sense. He was old, and his cultivation was the lowest among the few of us. Even if he obtained Chiyo's inheritance, it would only be a passing of the inheritance to Fatty. In this case, it was the wisest choice for him to step back. If I could understand this, Lin Aching, who had lived for dozens of years, could also understand it. That was why he didn't hesitate when making his choice. After Lin Aching stepped back, there were no more obstacles. The three of us walked together and came to the platform. Originally, we planned to enter together, but when we walked to the door of the inheritance and looked at the swirling blood on the door, our hearts began to race. Although Lu Jinyang's heavenly master had told us about the situation inside the door, no one could guarantee that the situation inside each door was the same, nor could they guarantee that there were no hidden dangers inside. Moreover, the door of the inheritance originated from the divination. The divination had 6 lines, 2 yang and 4 yin, so the things inside the door were different. It took a lot of thought to choose which door to enter. So, we couldn't make up our minds and stood under the platform, hesitating to move forward. At this time, Officer Wong suddenly said to me, "Zhou, in my opinion, why don't we go in separately? We don't know what will happen inside the door, so we can't die together. If we go in separately, we can take care of each other in case of danger. What do you think?" After listening to his words, I frowned. I was afraid that Lu Jinyang would attack me when Officer Wong went in. If we went in separately, how could we guard against Lu Jinyang? Before I could say anything, Officer Wong seemed to read my mind. He shook his head and said with a smile, "You don't need to worry about Lu Jinyang. When I go in, I will give you the inherited protective artifact. You can use it temporarily. He can't touch you. Don't worry." I was stunned. That artifact could resist Lu Jinyang's Qi Yu axe. It was a peerless treasure, but Officer Wong gave it to me? I felt somewhat embarrassed and hastily shook my head. "It's better if you give it to Ah Fu. It's fine as long as it can temporarily protect me. This item is too precious. Brother Wong should be more cautious." Wangan laughed. "Our 9 cauldron clans are of the same breath and branch. This is the word passed down by our ancestors. How can I not trust you?" His words made me feel a little ashamed. The so-called 9 Cauldron clan had always been talked about by Officer Wong and the fatty father and son. As for me, I had never heard of it before today. Moreover, I knew that I wasn't a member of the 9 Cauldron clan. Tacitly agreeing to Officer Wong's words was just to make things easier for me. However, this wasn't the time for me to be frank. I opened my mouth, but eventually kept silent. Wonka took out the black sword and handed it to me. At the same time, he whispered to me, "This sword is called Qing Su, and it's the treasure of Wangwu Grotto Heaven. Although Fu is a member of the Wong family, the Tao that he cultivates is different from the disciples of the Wong family. And this Dharma artifact can only be controlled by members of the 9 Cauldrons clan using shaman chi. Although I don't know why you practice both witchcraft and Taoism, you must remember that when you use this sword, you must use shaman chi to control it." So that's how it was. I finally understood. I reached out to take the clear void sword and asked Wong Qin, "Who will go in first?" Officer Wong didn't stand on ceremony. After pondering for a while, he said, "You two stay outside. I'll go in and explore. Our Wong family has the most information about Chiyo's inheritance. We'll be more confident if we go in." I didn't want to express my gratitude, so I just nodded and told him, "Take care." Officer Wong waved his hand. When he was about to enter the high platform, he turned around and said to me, "If there are any changes, remember to use the Qing Su sword to protect everyone." Then he lifted his foot and jumped onto the high platform. I was a little confused, but I soon understood. He must have told me to protect myself and not to forget Fu and the others. I lifted my head to look at the high platform. Although I didn't know the situation inside the door, the first door was created by Yang Yao. There was no danger inside, only rare treasures. To be safe, we should choose the fifth door, which was also created by Yang Yao. However, Officer Wang didn't seem to care. He lifted his foot and stepped into the second door. This door was created by Yin Yao. There were only two blood-red pillars on both sides. There was no beam in the middle. After Officer Wang entered the door, the blood-red light vanished, and both he and the door disappeared. My heart tightened, and I waited in silence. At the same time, I held the Qing Su sword in my hand and paid attention to Lu Jinyang's movements. It was different from what we had worried about. After Officer Wang entered the door, Lu Jinyang's eyes were fixed on the place where the second door had disappeared. He didn't even look at me. Apparently, his mind was focused on Chiyo's inheritance. I didn't know if he didn't want to cause more trouble or if he was afraid of my Qing Su sword. Anyway, he didn't take action, which was the best result. Without Officer Wang, I wasn't sure what to do next. While I waited in silence, time seemed to pass very slowly. I didn't know how long it had been before the place where the second door had disappeared started to move again. A blood-red light appeared out of thin air. The Yin Yao gate emerged and then disappeared. Officer Wang's figure appeared on the high platform. I exhaled in relief when I saw Officer Wang. Inside the blood door, it wasn't a blessing, but a disaster. Officer Wang's safe appearance proved that it wasn't a disaster, but a blessing. But in the next quarter of an hour, I frowned again. Different from the previous man, when Officer Wang appeared, there was no movement around him. Moreover, he wasn't standing, but sitting cross-legged on the ground with his eyes closed. My first thought was that he had received Chiyo's inheritance. At this moment, he was sitting cross-legged with his eyes closed. But soon, I ruled out this idea. The previous man had only received the copper horn crown, but he had already created such a strange phenomenon. If Officer Wang had received Chiyo's inheritance, how could he be so calm? There was an old saying that when rare treasures fell from the sky, they would create strange phenomena. In the same way, Chiyo's inheritance couldn't be so calm. But why did Officer Wang look like this? Before I could figure it out, a clap of thunder came from above my head. I lifted my head and saw that we were inside the blood coffin. It wasn't the sky above our heads, but the thick blood mist around us. I didn't know where the silver lightning came from. When the clap of thunder was heard, it tore the blood mist apart and disappeared in a flash. After the first lightning bolt, another one followed. Thunder rumbled 3 times in a row. After the 3 claps of thunder, the air around us suddenly moved, as if a wind was blowing. But we're inside the blood coffin. How could there be wind? While I was puzzled, Ah Fu and Ah Shou kneeled in the distance and said excitedly, "My Lord Wang, our young master has finally become a heavenly master. He's going to condense his seal." What? I immediately understood. 3 claps of thunder. The heavenly master had descended. Officer Wang, who had just walked out of the blood door, had suddenly broken through to the heavenly master realm. Although he was strong and his subordinates all had the cultivation base of Yang God Celestial Master, I could tell from the beginning that Officer Wang's realm was similar to mine. We were both at the glorious consciousness realm and hadn't yet pushed the door to the heavenly master realm. At his age, this realm was extraordinary, but he wasn't an ordinary person. He was the master of the Wangwu Cave. I didn't believe that he didn't have the method to become a heavenly master. The reason why he was stuck in this realm was either a coincidence or he had a purpose, which was similar to mine. The blood coffin was a dangerous place. If he wasn't forced, I believed that Officer Wang would never try to become a heavenly master here. It was highly likely that he had deliberately kept his current situation. Furthermore, he had instructed me to protect everyone if anything were to happen. When he was trying to break through to the heavenly master realm, he wouldn't have the strength to protect himself. The words he said earlier were clearly for me to protect him at this moment. After understanding it, I hurriedly jumped onto the high platform holding the Qingshu sword and standing next to him. At the same time, Ah Fu and Ah Shou also arrived and stood on the other side of Officer Wang. I turned to look at Lu Jinyang, who was also staring at Officer Wang. However, he was still standing in the same place and didn't move. I felt relieved and looked at Officer Wang again. Chapter 5:27. Wang Can, who was sitting cross-legged on the high platform, suddenly became blurred. The blood mist around him seemed to have suddenly faded and turned into a white mist, wrapping him up. The white mist made Wang Can's body look illusory. Vaguely, he seemed to be an immortal sitting cross-legged on the top of the Kunlun holy ruins. As the mist lingered and the breeze blew, a kind of immortal aura that did not belong to the human world gradually surged around him. After the three thunders, the stainless wind blew. There were shackles and filth in the human body. When one entered the celestial master realm, he had to be shaken by the thunder and cleansed by the wind in order to get rid of the shackles and step into the Taoist sect. The soul-shaking thunder was the three thunders just now, and the cleansing wind was the stainless wind at this moment. The wind was very weak at first, but it grew stronger in a moment. However, the strange thing was that the mist around him was very firm, and no matter how the wind blew, it could not move at all. The mist was firm, but his clothes and hair could not withstand the wind and were torn backward. Fortunately, his clothes were firm and were not damaged no matter how the wind tore them. After no less than 3 minutes, under the relentless effect of the stainless wind, the firm mist finally moved. The mist seemed to have turned into cotton, peeling off from it bit by bit. As soon as it left the main body, it disappeared with the wind. The mist became thinner and thinner, and Wang Can's body became more and more clear. At this time, his skin was almost transparent. It seemed that his body was no longer made of flesh and blood, but jade and dew, which had an indescribable luster. The stainless wind continued until all the mist around him disappeared. Wang Can did not move from his cross-legged position on the ground, but his body swayed and floated up. 1 inch, 2 inches, 1 foot, 2 feet. His flying speed was extremely slow, but his upward momentum did not stop. Slowly, he rose to a height of several feet and floated there. The sign of entering the celestial master realm was flying. After experiencing the 3 soul-shaking thunders and the cleansing of the breeze, Wang Can's fetus had been cleansed of dirt and broken through the shackles. Now that he was flying in the air, it meant that he had entered the celestial master realm. Next, as long as he stabilized his realm in the air, he would be a real celestial master when he landed. I heaved a sigh of relief. When I reached the heavenly master realm, I didn't have the power to protect myself. But now, Wang Can's soul had returned to his body. Even if Lu Jinyang attacked him, he would have the power to resist. Moreover, with the clear void sword in my hand, I was sure that Wang Can wouldn't be in any danger. At the same time, I felt a surge of anticipation. Generally speaking, after advancing to the Celestial Master Realm, it would take some time before one could condense the Celestial Master Seal. This was because the energy in the body of a Celestial Master was fundamentally different from that of an Earthly Master. At the Earthly Master Realm, regardless of whether one cultivated Tao Qi or Sorcery Qi, their energy was still Qi. Among the 3 realms of the Earthly Master Realm, the Qi was the thinnest during the Dragon-Seeking Realm, which existed in the form of gas in the heavenly veins. During the Acupoint Realm, the Qi gradually condensed and turned into liquid. After the Glorious Consciousness Realm, the Qi in the body became more majestic and formed a source stone, which resided at the bottom of the heavenly veins and kept spinning. After becoming a celestial master, the 7-star source stone would be shattered and blown away by the soul-shaking thunder and the stainless wind. Then, it would turn into gas again. Although it was in a gas state, during this process, the gas source stone would be compressed again. In the end, it would form Qi, which was completely different from the previous Qi. In the metaphysical world, it was called true origin. At this time, Wang Can was floating in the air motionlessly. He was in the process of transforming the shaman chi in his body into true origin. What was transformed from Taoist chi was called Taoist essence, and what was transformed from shaman chi was called shaman essence. When true origin was first formed, it was in a gas state. When the chi stored in the 7 source stones was transformed into true origin, it was only a small amount. It was completely insufficient to condense the celestial master seal. Celestial master realms were also divided into the early, middle, and later stages. When one had just entered the celestial master realm, he was only considered to be at the beginning. He needed to cultivate his true origin diligently. When his true origin formed a pillar of light in his body, he would be considered to have entered the early stage of the celestial master realm. At this time, the amount of true origin in his body was enough to condense the seal. Of course, this was for ordinary people. Judging from Wang Can's previous cultivation, the shaman chi in his body had long surpassed the limit of the glorious consciousness realm. Now that he had reached the celestial master realm, the shaman chi, transformed into shaman chi, was also far more powerful than ordinary people. He did not need to cultivate it all. He could directly reach the early stage of the celestial master realm and condense the seal. Although it was not known why he had suppressed his realm and deliberately came here to break through to the celestial master realm, it was possible to guess that all of this had something to do with condensing the celestial master seal. Although the celestial master realm was powerful, it was not the end of cultivation. People with great ambitions would not slack off after reaching this realm. Instead, they would continue to work hard and step into a higher realm. The celestial master seal determined whether a cultivator could set foot in a higher realm or not. The celestial master seal was the aptitude of a celestial master. The worst, like Liang Tianxin, only had half a word on the seal. With this kind of aptitude, it was difficult to enter the middle or late stage of the celestial master realm, not to mention a higher realm. The slightly stronger ones, like the hunchbacked old man, Xiao Sige, had a complete word on the seal. This kind of aptitude depended on the number of strokes and the meaning of the words. If the strokes were complicated and the meaning of the words were majestic, they could cultivate to the late stage of the celestial master realm or even the advanced stage of the celestial master realm. They also had a chance to see the young god celestial master. On the contrary, people like Xiao Sige only had the aptitude of the middle stage of the celestial master realm. If there was no heaven-defying encounter in this life, it was impossible for him to become a young god celestial master. If there was more than one word on the celestial master seal, the probability of setting foot in a young god celestial master realm was very high. Those with 2 words, as long as there were no accidents and they cultivated smoothly, could almost certainly advance to the next level and condense the young god. If there were 3 words on the celestial master seal, it was more likely that they would set foot in a higher realm. There were only a few people like Lu Jinyang who had 4 complete words on the celestial master seal since ancient times. Those with this kind of talent could be easily achieved by a young god celestial master, and it would not be difficult for them to reach the next level in the future. At this moment, thinking about it, Wang Can entered the Chiyu tomb for the inheritance of Chiyu. Condensing the celestial master seal here was definitely his original plan. Although the inheritance was important, if one's aptitude was not enough, everything would be in vain. The road of cultivation was long. Even if one had the best aptitude, he had to put in enough effort and sweat. He had to ensure that he could avoid all accidents along the way in order to achieve something. The idea that hard work will reap rewards was actually a fallacy, at least in the metaphysics world. Just like the saying in the secular world, geniuses were composed of 99% perspiration and 1% talent. The key point of this saying was not the 99% perspiration, nor the 1% talent, but that both were indispensable. Reality was always cruel. Diligence could make up for stupidity, but it couldn't make up for talent. Only with enough talent could one have the qualification to peak at the highest realm. Therefore, even Wang Can, the master of the Wangwu cave, had to be very careful when condensing the Celestial Master Seal. In order to improve his strength, he had to put in any effort. No one knew what was behind the blood door he had entered. However, since he had started to break through to the Celestial Master Seal after coming out of there, it proved that he had gotten what he wanted and was confident that he could condense the strongest seal he could achieve. That was exactly what I was looking forward to. What kind of seal others could condense had little to do with what kind of seal I could condense. However, it was just like the college entrance examination. Before I knew my own score, I always wanted to ask others about it so that I could estimate my own score and cheer myself up. That was probably what I was feeling at the moment. I looked at Wang Can anxiously. Under everyone's gazes, Wang Can, who was still sitting cross-legged in the air, finally moved. Above his head, a beam of light slowly flowed out. The colorful light was gorgeous. As soon as it appeared, it illuminated the entire space, making everyone squint their eyes. As more and more of the light flowed out, the dazzling light, which had been shining far away, became restrained. As the 7 colors moved, the light shrank. From covering the sky and the earth, it gradually shrunk to only covering the top of the mountain and then to the high platform. In the end, it condensed further, and the 7-colored light converged above Wang Can's head. After the dazzling colors condensed to one point, all the other colors disappeared. In the end, it became white, and the outline of a milky seal gradually appeared. The Celestial Master Seal was condensed. When the last trace of the outline was solidified, the milky white seal that was about 3 inches tall suddenly burst out with an extremely dazzling 7-colored brilliance. This brilliance did not spread far away, but in the sky, it scattered into strokes, outlining 4 large words. Chapter 528. It was another 4-word seal. Although I had guessed that Wang Can's Celestial Master Seal was extraordinary before the answer was revealed, I didn't expect that it would be the same as Lu Jinyang's. It was the ultimate seal. However, the words on his seal puzzled me. Holy Spirit Guard Commander. It sounded like it had something to do with the Blood Spirit Guard, but I couldn't figure it out. At this time, Ah Fu and Ah Shou had already come close. They stared at the 4 words in the air, their eyes burning with excitement. Ah Shou kept repeating 4 words, 4 words, as if he had fallen into a trance. Ah Fu murmured, Holy Spirit Guard. Holy Spirit Guard. Young Master has always been right. His seal is no longer the seal of Wangwu Grotto Heaven, but the Holy Spirit Guard. His words made me curious. It was said that the Celestial Master Seal varied from person to person. Why did Ah Fu say that the people of Wangwu Grotto Heaven had a fixed seal? Wang Can was still floating in the air. Since I had nothing to do, I asked Ah Fu about it. Ah Fu explained, although the Celestial Master Seal varies from person to person, the people of the same sect and practice the same cultivation technique have similar seals. They can't escape from the fixed format. For example, since Wangwu Grotto Heaven was founded by our ancestor, Wang Jun, when the later generations became Celestial Masters, their seals always had the words Wang Gu Qingxi written on them. It's just that the number of words and strokes are slightly different depending on the person's talent. Another example is Mount Longhu's Zhengyi School. Mount Longhu isn't a grotto heaven, but it's the residence of Celestial Master Zhang. It's one of the 72 blessed lands. However, because of Celestial Master Zhang's inheritance, its status is very high. After Jinren Zhang founded Zhengyi School, the seals of the later generations of Mount Longhu followed the words righteousness drives away evil, unifies all. After hearing his explanation, I finally understood what was going on. Combined with what Wang Can had said before, the meaning of the existence of the 9 Cauldron family was to wait for the sage to come to the world. Based on this, the Holy Spirit Guard was an organization similar to the Blood Spirit Guard. However, the Holy Spirit Guard wasn't loyal to Chiyu, but to the so-called sage. As for the word commander on the right side, it clearly meant control, which meant that Wang Can was the person who commanded the Holy Spirit Guard. I couldn't help but smile wryly. Earlier, I had guessed that I was the so-called sage. But now, even Wang Can, the sage's servant, had 4 characters on his seal. I didn't even know if I had 3 characters. How could I dream that I was the sage? Just as I was mocking myself, Wang Can, who was in midair, seemed to have finally completed his advancement to the heavenly master rank. His eyes, which had been tightly shut, suddenly opened. A bright light flashed in his eyes, and the 4 words formed by the 7-colored light in midair instantly dissipated. They turned into a flow and disappeared into his eyes. At the same time, the milky white seal above his head sank downwards and entered his body. After that, he slowly floated down and returned to the high platform. After looking around, his face lit up with joy as he jumped off the high platform and walked towards me. Ah Fu and Ah Shou hurried to greet him and asked him about his situation with concern. After Wang Can briefly explained his situation, he walked to my side and smiled at me. Brother Zhou, the blood door really has good fortune. I become a heavenly master first. Now it's up to you. The reason why I couldn't become a heavenly master was because of the Kirin venomous insect in my body. It wasn't because of good fortune. I shook my head and smiled wryly. Brother Wang's good fortune isn't necessarily my good fortune. I'm not sure if I can become a heavenly master or not. Ha! Wang Can laughed heartily and shook his head. That's not necessarily true. He didn't understand my situation, so I didn't explain much. I turned to look at the remaining blood doors on the high platform and prepared to go up. There were 4 blood doors, and no one knew what was in them. So, I didn't need to pick a time. Since Wang Can had mentioned it, it didn't matter if I went first. Just as I was about to leave, Lu Jinyang, who had been standing on the other side and observing silently, suddenly spoke. He said to the other heavenly master standing behind him, "Go up and enter the 3rd door." I put my foot down. Lu Jinyang had absolute power here, so I didn't want to compete with him. It didn't matter if I went 1 step earlier or 1 step later. Anyway, my target wasn't Chiyo's inheritance. Seeing me stop, Wang Can didn't say anything. After Lu Jinyang's subordinate, the heavenly master, went up the high platform and entered the 3rd door, he said to me, "According to my previous experience, there should be good fortune and precious treasures in the 6 blood doors. Moreover, it's highly possible that the treasures aren't fixed. Different treasures will appear depending on the person who enters. So, it doesn't matter if I go in early or late." I didn't know if he was trying to comfort me, or if that was the case, but it didn't matter. Even if I went in and found nothing, I wouldn't have any regrets. If I didn't have any hope, I wouldn't be disappointed. While the heavenly master was in the 3rd door, I told him the meaning of the 4 words in Wang Can's seal and asked him if it was true. Wang Can nodded and said excitedly, "That's right. The Holy Spirit Guard is the Sage's Guard." I tried my best to suppress my cultivation to enter Chiyo's tomb and borrow a wisp of Chiyo's divine power to condense the seal. All of this was for the 3 words Holy Spirit Guard. Of course, I didn't expect that the final result would be better than I had expected. I got 4 words. I still didn't understand and continue to ask, since the 9 Cauldrons clan is the Sage's Guard, why do they need to borrow Chiyo's divine power to condense the seal? Wang Can shook his head and said, "It's true that the 9 Cauldrons clan is the Sage's Guard, but their lineage has been passed down for thousands of years. Their bloodline is already messed up. What they cultivate is not the Sage's technique. So how can they find the Sage's aura? Chiyo's divine power is different. Chiyu is one of the Sage's guards. His divine power has been preserved since the primitive times. The Sage's aura has never faded. With his power, we can activate the ancient inheritance in our bloodline and condense the Holy Spirit Guard seal. Zhou, you don't have to worry. Chiyo's divine power is enormous. Although I just absorb a wisp of it, there must be more in the other blood doors. You are at the consummate realm of glory of knowledge. When you enter the blood door, you are likely to encounter Chiyo's ancient divine power like me. Then you can condense the seal. Moreover, once the Holy Spirit Guard seal is condensed, it will have at least 3 words. If you have enough inheritance in your bloodline, it is not impossible to condense 4 words like me. It turned out that he had encountered Chiyo's divine power in the blood door. Moreover, this Holy Spirit Guard seal had at least 3 words. It was unbelievable. However, I knew that I wasn't a member of the 9 Cauldrons clan. It was impossible for me to have the ancient bloodline in my body. Even if I encountered Chiyo's divine power, it was impossible for me to condense such a seal. Moreover, even if I could condense it, it would only have 3 words, Holy Spirit Guard, and not 4 words like Wonkin had said. The words Holy Spirit Guard Commander had already explained that Wonkin was the person who commanded the Holy Spirit Guard. Since he was the commander, there could only be one person. Next, when the Holy Spirit Guard seal was condensed, it would only have 3 words, Holy Spirit Guard, and not 4 words. Wonkin probably understood this. His previous words were just to comfort and win me over. After all, if I was really a member of the Nine Cauldrons clan, I would be his subordinate after condensing the Holy Spirit Guard seal. Seals had the ability to suppress others. For example, Qiao Sigue of the corpse driving lineage. His Celestial Master seal had the word corpse. If someone in the sect condensed the Corpse King seal, it would have a natural suppressive force on Qiao Sigue. This kind of suppression wasn't the same as a 2-word seal suppressing a 1-word seal. Instead, it was much stronger. In the face of the Corpse King seal, Qiao Sigue wouldn't even have the slightest strength to resist. Similarly, Wonkin was the Holy Spirit Guard Commander. The other Holy Spirit Guard seals were naturally under his control. This kind of power came from the seal. It was deeply rooted and almost didn't allow any resistance. Therefore, if I was really a member of the Nine Cauldrons clan, I wouldn't have wanted to condense the Holy Spirit Guard seal. Of course, this was just my character. I didn't want to submit to others. Wonkin was a good person. If the fat father and son could condense the Holy Spirit Guard seal, it would be good too. At least, it would have 3 words. Chapter 529. He was different from Officer Wong. As soon as he came out, he created a big commotion. Strong gusts of wind rose. Although I was a heavenly master, I felt chills all over my body. When I lifted my head to look, I was startled. This man had a pair of wings on his back. I couldn't tell if it was a pair of wings or a magical weapon. However, the strong gusts of wind were caused by the giant wings on his back. I turned to look at the giant Chiyu statue at the foot of the mountain. No matter if it was in the legends or the statue at the foot of the mountain, Chiyu had a bull's head and a pair of wings on his back. It was reasonable that this man had a pair of giant wings after entering the blood door. From the strong gusts of wind caused by the flapping of his wings, I could tell that the power of his wings was really formidable. Just like the heavenly master who had the bronze cowhorn crown, although he had obtained the good fortune from the blood door, he was still very respectful to Lu Jinyang. After jumping off the high platform, he walked back to Lu Jinyang and said something to him. Then, he bowed and returned to stand behind Lu Jinyang. After him, there were 3 blood doors left on the high platform. Because of Lu Jinyang's previous action, I didn't hurry to step forward. I waited for him to make a decision first. Lu Jinyang didn't let me wait for long. After a while, he walked to the high platform. He lifted his head to look at the blood door for a few seconds. Then, he walked into the 4th blood door. Just like before, the blood door disappeared shortly after he entered. The place was strangely quiet. Everybody was gazing at the place where the 4th blood door had disappeared. Their eyes didn't blink. At this moment, there were 3 blood doors left. The one Lu Jinyang had entered was also a yin yao door, just like the other 2. However, not long after he had entered, strange phenomena appeared. The surrounding mountains suddenly shook a few times. Then, the Chiyu statue at the foot of the mountain, which was at the same level as the War God Mountain, suddenly shook. Pieces of his body fell off. The entire statue slowly rotated in a clockwise direction, as if it was stepping on a giant disc. From its back to the mountain, it rotated to face the mountain. Although body parts were scattered, the statue was so huge that it didn't seem to be damaged at all. After it spun around, the eyes on the huge head at the top of the statue were level with the platform we were standing on. The pair of stone eyeballs seemed to be alive as they stared at the blood doors on the platform. This sudden and strange scene caused everyone's heart to sink. Earlier, when people entered through the 3 blood doors, there was no such commotion. Now Lu Jinyang had just entered, and even Chiyo's statue had undergone such a great change. Could it be that he had really found Chiyo's inheritance? Although he found it hard to accept, it made sense when he thought about it. After all, Lu Xingyang had Chiyo's battle axe. That battle axe was the weapon that Chiyu used to fight for his entire life. It was his closest comrade in arms and companion. Just based on that battle axe, Lu Xingyang's chances of obtaining Chiyo's inheritance were much higher than others. After Chiyo's statue spun, the sound of war drums echoed in the air. However, it was different from when we had entered the mountain. At that time, the war drums had been deafening, but now, we could only hear a faint sound. Officer Wang turned around and exchanged looks with me. His face darkened. After this trip to Chiyo's tomb, no matter what the result was, Lu Xingyang and the Wang family would be archenemies. No one would want to see their archenemy, who was already an outstanding talent, get such a terrifying inheritance. The only good thing was that the inheritance was different from the magic devices. It couldn't enhance Lu Xingyang's strength in a short time, so the Qingshu sword in Officer Wang's hand should be able to protect our lives for the time being. Moreover, we had stayed in front of the inheritance gate for a long time. The Wang family support would arrive soon. Compared to before, the situation was much better. Although the sound of the Julie battle drum was not loud, it lingered in the ears. After an hour or so, the sound of the drum suddenly became louder. At the place where the fourth blood door had disappeared, a mass of bloodlight burst out. In a flash, the blood door reappeared, and Lu Xingyang's figure stepped out from behind the blood door. Unlike Officer Wang, he didn't close his eyes to digest what he had obtained. Instead, his eyes were bright and even brighter than before. After he came out, the blood gate behind him disappeared along with the war drums. However, after the blood gate disappeared, a giant statue appeared behind Lu Xingyang. It was the image of Chiyu with a bull's head and a pair of wings on its back. It looked exactly the same as the statue at the foot of the mountain. It floated in the sky behind Lu Xingyang, just like Lu Xingyang's back. A few seconds later, the gigantic virtual image of Chiyu slowly disappeared. It turned into a stream of light and disappeared into Lu Xingyang's body. Then, a smile appeared on his ugly and terrifying face as he jumped down from the high platform. If we still had a glimmer of hope before, now we were sure that Lu Xingyang had obtained Chiyo's inheritance. This person was like a cockroach that couldn't be killed. That year, I broke his arm and then pierced his chest with a silver talisman to destroy his cultivation base. However, he didn't become a useless person. On the contrary, he became stronger and stronger. I didn't put in my eyes at first, but now, he was much stronger than me. From the beginning to the end, it seemed that fate was in place. After so many years, he was still an enemy that I couldn't avoid. I was extremely afraid of him. The sorrow that he had brought me was still lingering in my heart. Facing Lu Xingyang, who was much stronger than me, I had to hide my hatred in my heart temporarily. At the same time, I had to be extremely careful. I couldn't give him a chance to take revenge on me. Otherwise, I would be doomed eternally. After getting down from the high platform, although Lu Xingyang returned to his original position, his eyes were still fixed on me. It was different from his previous gaze that was filled with pure hatred. The hatred in his gaze had disappeared and was replaced with disdain. It was the same as the young phoenix gathering at the headquarters of the Metaphysics Association. After obtaining Chiyo's inheritance, Lu Xingyang wasn't afraid of my Xian Yuan sword anymore. Although the Xian Yuan sword was much stronger than Chiyo's axe, it was still a dead object. However, Chiyo's inheritance was different. With this inheritance, Lu Xingyang's cultivation could reach war God Chiyo's level in the future. In comparison, the Xian Yuan sword was nothing. This was the reason why his gaze had changed when he looked at me. When facing an enemy that was stronger than you, even if you knew that there wasn't much hope of taking revenge, your hatred would burn your heart and make you restless. However, when your power surpassed the enemy and you saw the hope of taking revenge, your hatred would subside and you wouldn't be as anxious. It was the same when I saw the Lu family. Therefore, I felt a little impatient at this moment. Lu Xingyang had already obtained Chiyo's inheritance. What else was in the two blood doors? Would I be able to obtain something that would allow me to fight against Lu Xingyang? Would my power be able to increase? If I want to know the answer, I would have to enter the blood door to know everything. This time, I didn't need Officer Wong to urge me. I didn't want to be modest with the fatty. I took a deep breath and walked toward the high platform. I stepped on the high platform and stood in front of the fifth blood door. I gazed at the blood mist that was constantly surging on the door. After pondering for a while, I stepped into the door. From the outside, the blood door was just an outline of the blood mist. However, after entering, I felt like I had entered a world of blood mist. The blood mist here was much thicker than outside. It was so thick that I couldn't even see my own fingers. I could only see 2 or 3 meters in front of me. I had to search around for a long time before I recognized that I was in a narrow passage. When I turned around, the blood door that I had entered had disappeared. Behind me was the same thick blood mist that I couldn't see the end of. It was different from what Lu Jinyang's heavenly master had told me. He had told me that after entering, I had pushed open a door and found a long, blood-red table with many magical tools on it. However, at this moment, there was no door or long, blood-red table in front of me. There was only the endless blood mist. I pulled myself together and didn't worry too much. From the situation of the first 4 doors, I didn't think there would be any danger in there. Since the situation was different, I would have to explore by myself. Chapter 5:30. I was excited. I didn't panic, but I was happy. Although I had only taken 100 steps after entering the door, I couldn't see the surroundings in the thick blood mist. I could only move forward bit by bit. My mind was tense, and I felt a little tired. The sudden appearance of this figure meant that I didn't need to search around like a headless fly in the blood mist anymore. It wasn't a bad thing. Of course, although I was happy, I didn't rush forward. I slowly moved forward, maintaining the same speed as before. When I was around 10 meters away from the figure, the blood mist became thinner, and I could finally see the figure's appearance. I frowned. The figure wasn't a real person, but it wasn't out of my expectation. The blood door was illusory, so it wouldn't be right if a real person appeared inside. What surprised me the most was that the figure didn't look like a real person. It looked like a mannequin in a clothing store. Its entire body was ash white, and I couldn't see its facial features. It was completely naked, and it just stood there, waiting for me to approach it. I continued to move forward. When I was around 5 meters away from it, I could see it more clearly. This figure didn't look any different from a mannequin. However, it was more exquisite, and its facial features were clear. It didn't look different from a real person. However, when I took a closer look, I found that the mannequin's face and facial features were ordinary. It didn't have any special features. After looking at it for a while, I couldn't remember it at all. It had an extremely common face. I walked to the front of the mannequin and carefully observed it. Although I couldn't see what material it was made of, I was sure that it was made of clay and not a living creature. Moreover, when I closed my eyes to sense, I didn't sense any aura. It wasn't a magical tool or a magical weapon. It was strange. From the previous 4 blood doors, they had all treasures. Why did I get such a strange thing when it was my turn? After Officer Wong got out of the blood door, he told me that nothing was fixed inside the blood door. What one could get depended on one's luck and fate. Could it be that my luck wasn't good enough, and the others could get treasures, but I wasn't lucky enough? No matter how I thought about it, it didn't make sense. Even if my luck wasn't as good as the others, it didn't make sense that I would get something useless. After thinking about it for a while, I changed my mind. Could it be that this mannequin was just used to lead the way? The real treasure was in front of me. After thinking about it, I gave up studying the mannequin and walked forward. After a few steps, I saw another blood door in front of me. It looked exactly the same as the one I had just entered. Even though I had been walking forward ever since I entered, when I saw this door, I understood that this door was the blood door that I had entered from. If I stepped out of this door, I would be able to leave this place and return to the high platform. Although I had no idea, it now wasn't the time to verify my intuition. I decided to go back to the mannequin. I had to think about it, but I would have to go back to the mannequin time. I had the mannequin by the puppet. And time. I went back to the mannequin and observed it. After confirming that I couldn't find anything, I reached out to hold the mannequin. I want to pick it up and leave. However, as soon as my hands touched the mannequin, a suction force came from it. I couldn't exert any force and was frozen on the spot. I was startled and recalled the feeling I had when I had instilled my spirit into the small cauldron. At that time, there was also a powerful suction force that I couldn't resist. It was very similar to what I was feeling now. Realizing this, I hurried to check my body's aura. What I saw surprised me. No matter if it was my spirit or my Tao Qi, they were the same as before. It didn't flow out. However, I could feel that under this strong suction force, some kind of power in my body was slowly being stripped away and transferred to the mannequin. The fear of the unknown made me flustered. Just as I was about to check my body's condition, the mannequin in front of me suddenly changed. A black pattern suddenly appeared on the white, clean, and empty body of the mannequin. Moreover, when I looked at it, I saw that the black pattern was slowly extending. Soon, it formed an irregular circle in front of the mannequin's chest. Although the circle looked like a simple outline, and other people wouldn't be able to recognize it, it was extremely familiar to me. It was the Qilin tattoo on my chest. My mind flashed. Was the suction force from the mannequin in my body the Qilin goo? I wanted to tear my clothes and check the Qilin tattoo on my chest. However, my hands were stuck to the mannequin, and I couldn't move. I couldn't use my Tao Qi under the suction force, either. I couldn't move at all. I could only watch the changes on the mannequin's body and wait in silence. After the black outline was outlined, black vein patterns quickly appeared in the circled area. This time, it wasn't just one, but countless vein patterns appeared at the same time. At the same time, I felt that the power in my body was surging faster and faster. After half a minute, an exaggerated and exquisite Qilin tattoo appeared on the mannequin's chest. From the heart to the collarbone, there was a beautiful horn with a silver mane around its neck. It had a lion's head, tiger's eyes, an elk's body, dragon scales, and an ox's tail. Everything was exactly the same as the Qilin tattoo on my chest. The suction force on my hands didn't stop. Instead, it became faster. Naturally, I thought about the ink dragon tattoo on my back. However, I was facing the mannequin, so I couldn't see its back. I could only guess. It was different from the Qilin tattoo. The ink dragon tattoo was where the snake's spirit resided. If the mannequin was also sucked in, would the snake's spirit be in danger? Although I was worried, I couldn't even take care of myself. I couldn't take care of the snake's spirit, either. I could only feel anxious. Luckily, I didn't have to wait for too long. Half a minute later, the strong suction force on the mannequin disappeared. My body shook, and my hands fell from the mannequin. After I regained my freedom, I hurriedly tore the clothes on my chest and lowered my head to look. Just as I had expected, the Qilin tattoo that had troubled me for a long time had disappeared. I twisted my body and looked behind me. Although I couldn't see my entire back, I could vaguely see the black pattern on my waist. It was obvious that the ink dragon tattoo was still there. I heaved a sigh of relief. The ink dragon tattoo was still there, which meant that the snake's spirit wouldn't have any problems. It was different from the Qilin tattoo. The ink dragon tattoo had appeared because the snake's spirit had attached itself to my body. Although it was a dragon parasite, it didn't originate from my body, so it wouldn't affect me much. The thing that had been bothering me and preventing me from advancing to Heavenly Master was actually the Qilin parasite. Now that the Qilin parasite was gone, it meant that the last obstacle to advancing to Heavenly Master was gone. As long as I wanted to, I could advance at any time. To cultivators, the realm of Heavenly Master was a milestone. When one reached this realm, they were truly extraordinary. Only then could they soar in the sky and look down on the world. After absorbing the shaman energy of the giant corpse and the Corpsine sect and obtaining the qualification to advance to Heavenly Master, I had wanted to break through immediately. The reason why I had delayed until now was because of the Qilin parasite. As soon as I got rid of it, I immediately wanted to advance to the next realm. However, after thinking for a while, I temporarily suppressed this impulse. After all, I was inside the blood door, and the space was narrow. After advancing, I wouldn't be able to perform the process of flying in the sky. Moreover, when Officer Wong had advanced to Heavenly Master, he had chosen to go out. Apparently, he also thought that it wasn't suitable to stay inside the blood door. After making up my mind, I prepared to leave. However, as soon as I lifted my head, I was stunned. The mannequin in front of me had disappeared. It had been replaced by an ink-black, majestic Qilin with silver fur. It looked exactly the same as the Qilin parasite tattoo. However, it wasn't a portrait anymore. It had turned into a living creature. It was obvious that this thing was the mannequin that had absorbed the Qilin parasite. Chapter 531. The Qilin seemed to be observing me, but when I turned to look at it, it turned its head around and looked up. It snorted and stomped its front paws on the ground, looking disdainful. Seeing this, I couldn't help but laugh. After I calmed down from the shock, I started to ponder. The old which it called the snake's spirit dragon goo. At first, it had been fed with a lot of goo. Then, it had absorbed a lot of true dragon saliva. After crossing the dragon's gate, it had turned into a jiao and had its own body. Now, the Qilin goo had attached itself to this doll and turned into a Qilin. From this, I could see that this doll could replace the goo worm and the power of the true dragon saliva. It must be some kind of treasure. I just couldn't recognize it before. My luck wasn't bad. After entering the blood door, I got rid of the Qilin goo and obtained this doll, which helped the Qilin goo transform. However, the items that the others had obtained before were either Chiyo's magic tools, inheritance, or divine power. I didn't know the origin of this doll. However, in the legends, the three Miao people were the descendants of Julie, and they respected the Qi as their ancestor. Perhaps the Miao people's goo technique came from Qiyu, so it wasn't strange that his tomb had something related to it. At this moment, I needed to figure out what kind of existence this Qilin in front of me was. Although it looked like a living Qilin, in the legends, Qilin wasn't inferior to dragons or phoenixes. Its status was even higher than them. If it was a living Qilin, it would be in existence even more terrifying than a true dragon. In terms of cultivation base, not to mention the heavenly masters, even the immortals who had ascended to the heavens weren't necessarily its opponent. Although this doll was magical, I didn't believe that it could turn the Qilin goo into a living Qilin. I thought that the Qilin in front of me only had the appearance of a Qilin. In the end, it was just a wisp of the Qilin goo soul that had borrowed the doll to transform. It couldn't be considered a real Qilin. However, no one had ever seen a Qilin before, so I could only guess. I couldn't be sure. However, after thinking for a while, I thought of a way to test it. The Qilin sacred beast had extraordinary power. I just needed to test this fellow's cultivation base to know its background. Coincidentally, looking at his arrogant expression, he most likely didn't want to go with me. After I beat him up a little, I could also dampen his spirit a little. With this thought in mind, I stepped forward and extended my hand to stroke the fur on its neck. The Qilin was a living creature. After I touched it, it leaned to the side and turned to look at me with disgust. It seemed it didn't like me at all. If it wasn't a living being, it would be impossible for it to have such an expression. However, after expressing its disgust, it didn't do anything else. It turned around and looked at the sky, as though it didn't want to look at me anymore. I smiled. Those who were extremely powerful wouldn't have such a gentle temper. The way they expressed their disgust wouldn't be by rolling their eyes. The chances of them slapping me were much higher. I had a better idea of what was going on. I wrapped my arm around his neck and beckoned, "Follow me. Let's leave this place." He was originally facing the opposite direction from me. After I said that, I exerted force and pulled his head toward me. It was obvious that he was resisting. He exerted force to resist my hand. However, the resistance was very small and couldn't stop my actions at all. This made my heart sink. The shaman energy that I had mobilized to prevent him from suddenly attacking me dispersed. Not only did this fellow not have the terrifying power that I had imagined, but it also didn't have any magic power. The strength that it had used to resist was similar to that of a dog with a similar body size. At this moment, I didn't doubt that it was a real Qilin anymore. On the contrary, I suspected that it was a strange dog that didn't have any cultivation base. It was just for show. Then, I carefully sensed for half a day. I even used the power of a 9-star heavenly dipper. However, I couldn't see any trace of power from it. Even the old witch that had used the Gu had at least the cultivation base of Sure Yao. The Gu was said to be able to swallow heavenly masters. The Gu that was created from the combination of the Gu and the doll was a little too weak. I sighed. It didn't have any cultivation base. At least it didn't look bad. It had a black body and silver fur. It was so handsome that it made people's hair stand on end. If I kept it by my side, it would be a good pet to scare people. I patted its head and pointed at the blood door not far from us, asking it to leave with me. This fellow could understand me, but he didn't want to. He stood there and lifted his head. He didn't seem to want to go with me. I didn't try to be polite with him. I grabbed the fur on his neck and dragged him forward like I was dragging a pet dog. After a few steps, he seemed to know that he couldn't resist anymore. He whimpered and struggled to get out of my hand. I let go of him and pointed at the blood door in front of us. This time, the didn't resist. He lifted his feet and walked forward. However, he still lifted his head and wore a disdainful face. It seemed that I wasn't forcing him. He just didn't want to bother with me and was reluctantly listening to me. This rascal reminded me of the spirit snake. I shook my head and smiled. I didn't want to argue with him and followed him out of the blood door. As soon as we stepped out of the door, Officer Wong, the fatty, and Lu Jinyang appeared in my sight. It was just as I had guessed. This blood door was the way out. I stood on the high platform with the Qilin. The blood door behind us turned into a blood mist and dispersed. Everyone gazed at us. However, they didn't look at me, but at the Qilin. Both Officer Wong and Lu Jinyang looked as if they had seen a ghost. They didn't look any better than me. Although it was a good-for-nothing product, its appearance was really good. I smiled and didn't want to explain to them. I took the Qilin with me and prepared to return to Officer Wong. However, before I could move, the shaman energy in my body seemed to boil. It shot up from the bottom of the vein of the heavens and out of the top of my head, reaching the sky. I was bewildered at first, but I immediately reacted. I had been suppressing my realm for a long time. Now that I had gotten rid of the Qilin insect, I couldn't control the power in my body, which was beyond the consummation of the glory of knowledge realm. It was proactively trying to break through to the heavenly master realm. At this moment, it was impossible to suppress it. I had to break through to the heavenly master realm. I was speechless. I could only give Officer Wong a look from a distance. Then, I sat down cross-legged and closed my eyes. At the last moment before I closed my eyes, I saw Officer Wong holding the Qingshu sword and heading toward me with Fu and the others. Kirin, who was next to me, didn't leave. He stood there majestically as if he was protecting me. At this critical moment, I couldn't help but laugh. Although Lu Jinyang was strong, Officer Wong's clear void sword could resist him for a while. Even the Qilin, who had appeared out of nowhere, could subdue Lu Jinyang. He wouldn't dare to act rashly. Although this fellow was useless, whether it was his appearance or demeanor, he was perfect for scaring people. Moreover, I had just come out of the blood door. Lu Jinyang didn't know the situation, so he didn't dare to act rashly. With that in mind, I relaxed a lot. After closing my eyes, I entered the state of forgetting myself and the surroundings. It was almost the same as when Officer Wong had broken through. After I closed my eyes, the shaman energy in my body surged out of the top of my head and shot up to the sky. Shortly after, 3 thunderclaps came from the sky. When Officer Wong broke through, I only felt that the thunderclap was very loud, but I didn't feel anything else. But when it came to me, the thunderclap seemed to explode in my head. I almost lost my consciousness, and I felt as if my soul had been shattered by the formation. After the thunderclaps, a pure wind blew. Although I knew it was the wind, the strong wind that was blowing at me felt like it was carrying countless steel needles. They entered my body through my pores and went out through the other end of my pores. The pain was excruciating. However, in the midst of this extreme pain, my soul, which had been scattered by the thunderclaps, seemed to gather again. Moreover, it surged up as if it wanted to jump out of my body. Soon, the pain in my body became numb, and I felt a little light. My soul seemed to have flown up and was floating in the air. If I opened my eyes, I would see that it wasn't my soul that was floating in the air, but my whole body. He did not know how long he had been in this state. Slowly, the numbing pain became weaker and weaker. What replaced it was a warm and comfortable feeling. The chi of Tao and witchcraft that had left his body earlier seemed to have returned. They surged into his body and turned into streams of warm currents that passed through his limbs and bones. They flowed into the meridian of heaven again and gathered at the bottom of the meridian of heaven, forming a ball of air that kept spinning. That mass of air was the celestial master's true essence. The true essence in the heavenly veins meant that I had successfully become a celestial master. At this time, my mind was clear. Successfully becoming a celestial master was within my expectations, so I wasn't too surprised. What I was really looking forward to was condensing the celestial master seal. Not long after, all the shaman energy that had left my body returned. After circling around my body, they scattered again and gathered at the top of my head. As the true essence gathered, the seal was formed. After all the true essence left my body, I instantly opened my eyes, as if I had been blessed. There wasn't a trace of blood mist around me. All the light seemed to have been absorbed by the light in front of me. The light was dazzling, and there were 10 colors in total. At this moment, they were intertwining and gathering in the air in front of me. Not long after, huge words formed by the intertwining light filled the sky. I looked over and saw that the first word formed by the 10-colored light had already formed. There were 4 strokes. First, there were 2 horizontal strokes, followed by a stroke. It was the word heaven. Chong Yin. Heaven, what is Chi Jio? How you? Untitled. The sky is unknown. The highest is the sky. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.